Book on the Thom Hartmann Book Report today, or Book Club today, is Cuban Women Confront the Future. It's an interview with Vilma Espin. Vilma Espin was the president of the Federation of Cuban Women since its founding in 1960, and was the chair of the Commission for Social Prevention and president of the Infancy Institute and the International Federation of Democratic Women. And it's a long-form interview, actually, the book. So the first question: what does socialism mean in the lives of a Cuban family, and in particular Cuban woman? Vilma Espin. For the Cuban family, especially the woman, socialism has meant an enormous improvement to the quality of life and personal development. We should remember that until January 1st, 1959, in our country, hunger, poverty, exploitation, repression, and dependence reigned. The revolution opened up new horizons in the economic, political, and social fields, and amongst its key principles is the defense of equal rights for all human beings. The constant struggle to make ends meet disappeared, and with it the antagonism between people competing for the crumbs that could help them escape the tragic destiny that awaited the majority. Thus the family, the basic cell of society, could develop in a rounded way. Our revolution assured all Cubans the chance to exercise each one of their inalienable rights. Each citizen is assured that food prices are reasonable and that education and medical services are free. The state makes a systemic effort to improve living standards to the extent that it is permitted by the tense battle for development that we wage under blockade and constant imperialist threats. Child care facilities have been created to provide care for the children of tens of thousands of working women from the age of 3 months to 6 years. Services to lighten domestic work have been created. Hundreds of thousands of students have also received free lunch at day school and all their meals at boarding school. Hundreds of thousands of workers also receive their meals at a moderate price in their workplace. More industrial laundries and dry cleaners have been established, and more domestic labor-saving devices are available with preference in acquisition and cheaper prices for workers. Huge resources are dedicated to housing construction in urban and rural zones. We also try to guarantee recreational facilities and spiritual enjoyment to all the population. Of course, the possibilities are exciting, but also what we have achieved to date, considering our limitations, is already vastly superior to what families experienced in the past. Social Security provides an income for those who cannot work. As far as women are concerned, equal rights have certainly changed their position in the family and in society. A woman's participation in social production, because it implies her financial independence, has altered her dependent position in the marriage and allowed a change in her ideas, in the way she looks at life. The laws that govern family relations, such as the Family Code, are based on equality and guarantee the right of members of the family to participate in society, to work, study, and to responsibly educate the children in line with our revolutionary principles. This does not mean that we achieved all that we aspire to. We still have problems of a material nature to resolve, which are directly related to our economic development. There is still the need to eliminate backward ideas that some people hold, men and women, with respect to the role that each person should play within the home, the nature of the socialist family and the relationship between a couple, ideas which work against the full participation of women in the building of a new society. Obviously, the economic security guaranteed by both men and women having access to work, free health care, and education, the obvious satisfaction and confidence in oneself that equal opportunity and the chance to fully develop to the extent of one's talents, intelligence, and aptitude offer to each person, the constant motivation and emotional stability that comes from feeling useful, recognized, and dignified as a human being. Everything that socialism has brought to us undoubtedly fulfills the deepest desires of a family, particularly the woman, who until just a quarter century ago was exploited, oppressed, and marginalized in the family and in society. Question: what is the primary concern in Cuba, work or the human being? What place do women occupy within this concern? Vilma Espin. In Cuba, a country that is building socialism, the highest aim is human happiness, based on respect for the fundamental human rights of each person. That includes full social equality to education, healthcare, work, and professional training, with the chance to employ all of one's faculties to take an active role in society and to help develop that society, to create the material and spiritual basis for a full, harmonious life, where the highest qualities of both men and women flourish. To reach those aspirations requires work, talent, dedication, and willingness from everybody, It requires constant scientific and technological innovation to assure economic and social development. Thus, each member of our society, along with the right to work and all the benefits brought by the revolution, has acquired the duty to help create the economic basis necessary for such advantages. The building of a new society and the fulfillment of new aspirations could not possibly be achieved except on the basis of work and the willingness of the whole population. And the people work with enthusiasm because work is the means for creating wealth and goods for all to enjoy. Work that is free from exploitation does require a new dimension, a quality that stimulates and produces satisfaction. To feel that you are useful and are creating your destiny, to project yourselves toward the future through your work, to cultivate the future. In a speech in January 1964, Che Guevara said that when each Cuban viewed work as a vital expression of their human creativity, technology, technique, and inventions would proceed apace, and all would participate with an uncontainable force in building the new society. The book, Cuban Women Confront the Future by Vilma Espin. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Want to connect with the show online?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, greetings from Chicago. And I'm hearing myself back in my own ear, Sean, right now. There we go. And we're thanks so much to WCPT, our Chicago affiliate, for loaning me a studio where I can hang out and do my show from. Tomorrow, we're going to be doing a show here live from Chicago, only it's going to be, we're going to have 3 labor leaders on for the whole 3 hours. And so, and we're going to be talking about, obviously, the news of the day and the issues and that kind of thing. But I'm not going to be taking phone calls. We're just, we're just going to be having these conversations. And so today, we're going to do Anything Goes Thursday. Live from Chicago. So, feel free to give us a shout if there's anything that you want to talk about. But I've got a few things I wanted to talk about. First of all, Donald Trump, just on his way to his helicopter or wherever he was going, walked out and talked to the press and said, hey, not only should Zelensky be looking at the Bidens, but so should China. It's like he's committing these crimes right out in front of us. I think this has been the theory of his life. I think, frankly, his whole entire life he's done things this way, figuring if he could just be very, very brazen and very, very, just do it out loud, and people will go, oh my God, I can't believe you did that. And he's like, well, I did. What are you going to do about it? Well, okay, we'll go on to something else. I don't think that they're going to go on to something else, but this is what's happening. Secondly, are you ready for President Pelosi? Now, I guarantee you there's not a single elected Democrat in the world who will tell you what I'm going to tell you, because they just don't want the right wing to go absolutely insane. But the right wing will be going insane with this any minute now. It turns out that Mike Pence was in on this bribery scheme. The Constitution says that a president shall be impeached for bribery, treason, bribery, or high crimes and misdemeanors. And bribery is when you offer a foreign government a bunch of weapons in exchange for their giving you something of value that is something that helps you get reelected, like dirt on your opponent. It's just, that's virtually the textbook definition of bribery. And now it turns out that Mike Pence wasn't on the call, but he had a readout of the call. He had what you and I saw, that copy that was printed where the president, Mr. Zelensky, the president of Ukraine says, we really would like those Javelin missiles, those anti-tank missiles, because, we're a little concerned here. And Trump said, well, I'd like a favor, though. In other words, a conditional favor. And Pence had that with him when he went to Poland to meet with Zelensky. And he sat down with Zelensky, and he specifically said, I'm on behalf of President Trump and the United States and all this kind of stuff, we would appreciate it if you would look into corruption, and which is code for Biden's in Trump world. And the argument that Pence's people are making now Mike Pence hasn't publicly spoken out about this, but the argument that his people are making is that he hadn't bothered to read the transcript. He didn't really know what he was saying. And Zelensky knew what he was saying. They had a conversation about what he was saying. New York Magazine has just, this is just insane. New York Magazine has an article about this, their Intelligencer column. And I just had to read this sentence to you. It's, or actually, it's two sentences. Although President Trump, quote, used Pence to tell Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky that U.S. aid was still being withheld. Okay, so that was covered. We're holding back the aid that you want because we want something from you. Although President Trump used Pence to tell Zelensky that U.S. aid was still being withheld, the Washington Post reports, Pence aides insist that he had no idea what he was actually being used for. Officials close to Pence, this is from the Washington Post, officials close to Pence insist that he was unaware of Trump's efforts to press Zelensky for damaging information about Biden and his son. And then this is the commentary from the New York Magazine that's just so on the money. Pence, by their accounting, is like a man who delivers a ransom note to a bank teller, failing to place any significance on the fact that the tellers have their hands in the air, the bank patrons are lying on the floor, and the guy who asked him to bring the note to the bank has a mask and a gun. They go on, Pence's involvement in the plot was extensive. White House officials had him cancel a planned trip to Zelensky's inauguration. This was to ramp up the pressure. One of Pence's top advisors was on the July 25th call when Trump made his clear demand that Zelensky open investigations into Biden, who Trump named on the call. So one of Pence's top people was on that call. Pence was given the transcript of the call before his September 1st meeting with Zelensky when he reiterated Trump's threat. And Pence's defense is that even though the readout of Trump's call was in his briefing materials on his trip to Europe, he didn't bother to read it. He's just, not that smart or not that interested. I don't know how long this is going to last or how far this is going to go or whether anybody's going to believe this or not. It seems pretty absurd and obscene. But, there it is. There it is. And Trump is just coming unhinged because the polls are starting to show now. This is, I think, pretty consequential. The polls are showing right now 45% of Americans support impeachment, not an investigation. More than half of Americans want an investigation. 45% say kick the bum out of office. 44% want him removed from the Senate. Okay, so 45% want the House to charge him. 44% say, and the Senate should convict him. And 52% of Americans, and this has been going on for a week. 52% of Americans say Trump committed abuse of power. And the percentage of people who oppose impeachment and oppose removal, 38 and 35% respectively. So, it's just not going the way he wants, Donald Trump. And I don't know how to say it beyond that. And now, the Trump administration is continuing to try to stonewall Congress. And Adam Schiff has come out and said, if you're going to stonewall us, That's just more obstruction of justice. And obstruction of justice was one of the articles against Richard Nixon. It was one of the articles against Bill Clinton. You know, it's basically the cover-up. The cover-up is worse than the crime, is the old saying. And you know, it's not always true, obviously, but the cover-up in this case was a big deal. And so, you know, we'll see where this goes. But, and Pompeo, you know, was in on it. He was on the call, we now know, our Secretary of State. And this is fascinating. Over at The Nation, Joan Walsh writing at The Nation about Mike Pence. He, you know, prior to becoming Secretary of State, Trump had made him head of the CIA. He used to be this right-wing Tea Party wackadoodle congressman from Kansas. That's who Pompeo used to be. He's you know, one of these insanely ambitious, I don't care who I step on kind of guys. And apparently, this is how he's been running his agencies. This is from Joan Walsh's piece in The Nation. Officials of the CIA, which he previously ran, leaked that he was widely despised for abusive behavior, including throwing binders at subordinates. Those were Mitt Romney's binders of women. And that his security detail threw an emancipation party when he left. And while Pompeo insisted Schiff and the Democrats were harassing State Department employees with subpoenas and requests for information about the department's role in Trump's Ukraine shakedown, reports emerged that some of those employees are approaching Democrats wanting to voluntarily testify. Former envoy. We'll be right back. For some reason, I'm not hearing the music in my ear. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Just a heads up that because I'm on remote, there's about a second delay between the time I finish talking and you hear me, and between the time you finish talking and I hear you. So sort of like when you see it on TV where they're talking to somebody on remote. When you're done talking, pause, and it'll take a second before you hear me respond. So given that, let's try John in Vancouver, Washington. John, what's on your mind today?
Hey, good morning, Tom. I was listening to Mark Pocan yesterday and him going through how Nader explained how we can't just immediately throw people in jail for withholding testimony or documentation or evidence, i.e. stonewalling. And with all of the laws that changed post-Nixon, wouldn't it be a good idea where the president has the power to suspend habeas corpus during times of war, that the Congress has time to suspend that to immediate documentation and witnesses when an impeachment is going on, so that we can shorten a clear and present danger in the White House?
Well, John, that's what the Supreme Court ruled in the case of U.S. v. Nixon back in '74. You know, Richard Nixon was saying, I don't have to turn stuff over. And the Supreme Court said, yes, you do, and you have to do it now. You have to do it immediately. And that's how Congress got the Nixon tapes, the White House tapes. He wanted to give them redacted transcripts saying that there was national security stuff and you know, blah-de-blah-de-blah. So my guess is that if they continue to stonewall, this will very rapidly go back to the Supreme Court, just like it did with Nixon. And the Supreme Court will either order it done, and if well, either they'll order it done or they won't. And if they don't, if they reverse their U.S. v. Nixon decision, which would be real interesting. I mean, you've got a very, very, very partisan Supreme Court. But I'm suspecting that John Roberts may well be the tie-breaking vote in favor of, no, you've got to turn this stuff over. But then the second part of that, John, is if Trump then says, okay, the Supreme Court told me to do it, I'm still not going to do it. You know, Abe Lincoln ignored. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm talking about in findings of contempt, to leave it to the congressional committee to find a witness in contempt and jail them, bypassing the judicial process.
Oh, I see.
Leave it up to the congressman to find them in contempt and jail them without having to go to court, so we don't have this months-long, years-long delay to find out what the heck is going on.
Yeah, what you're describing is what's called inherent contempt, which is where Congress can simply assert that authority that is inherent in their being the Article 1 branch of government, which has not been used since the 1920s or 1930s, and to the best of my knowledge has never been tested before the Supreme Court. So I'm looking forward. Congressman Pocan yesterday said that he was going to get Nadler's, a summary of Nadler's rationale to us all. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing that because, I think this is a big deal. I think it's just a huge big deal.
Yeah, so do I.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Tom. Have a great day, man.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, John. I think I got about 40 seconds here. So, there we go. We're hitting the brakes. So we'll be back with more of your calls and more of the news of the day right after this. Stick around. It's Thom Hartmann live from Chicago. We're broadcasting today from WCPT. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you live from Chicago from our affiliate, WCPT, Chicago's Progressive Talk. And thanks again for the studio loan. Jeff in San Francisco. Hey, Jeff, what's on your mind?
I just wanted to give some good news from California. I sent you a tweet today that Gavin Newsom signed AB 857 for public banks in California. It would be the second state after North Dakota to have a public bank, which is amazing since
that
we're the
is
fifth
great.
or sixth largest economy in the world. So,
yeah.
Any thoughts on that?
Do you have any sense of the timeline on this, Jeff? How it's going to play out? I know that San Francisco had at least had a resolution, going that they wanted to start their own bank, or is the state going to do? I mean, how is this going to play out?
I believe it's going to go through. There's 10 cities from San Diego, LA, San Francisco, Eureka, that they're going to have public banks through the cities throughout California. As far as the details, which is always the devil, but there was some really sharp, about 100 to 200 very active grassroots activists. Jackie Fielder was huge in it, Native American, and Trinity Tran, and they really pushed hard on this. And it started, both in San Francisco and LA, and so I'm sure they've got this. They really did some homework on this. And reading Ellen Brown's books, I mean, when one bank needs money, the other one can loan it to them. And she lays it out brilliantly. And I'd love you to bring her back sometime. So, but I'm real excited about this.
Yeah, me too. I think that's marvelous. Jeff, thanks a lot for the heads up on that. That is great, and I appreciate the call. Let me just remind you all, as you're calling in, that because I'm on remote, your phone call goes to Portland, and then Portland has to convey it to me here in Chicago, and then I talk back to Portland, and then Portland talks back to you, and so it's just like when you see on TV where the news anchor is talking to the person out in the field. There's about a 1 second delay from the time that you stop talking until I hear you stop talking, and vice versa. So, when you pause and you don't hear a response for a second, don't freak out or try to fill the space. I'll get right to you. David in Canoga Park, California. Hey, David, what's up?
Hi. I got about 20 seconds and then a question at the end. But
okay.
At this point, Trump is now a mob boss, and those people who support him are part of the mob, and they believe that they are at war. And you remember that conservative guy who called in earlier in the week, and you guys debated back and forth. It was great. And then you finally got him at the end. Something he knew was wrong and couldn't excuse away. And he said, "Sir, have you ever been in a war?" And in a war, all's fair in love and war. So everything Trump does to them is fair because they're in a war and they're armed to the teeth. So the question is, you remember that guy?
That's an interesting theory. Yeah, I do remember that guy, and I took his statement differently than you did, and I think you're probably right. I took it at the time that he was just trying to, do a personal attack on me, saying, I'm a veteran and I'm more patriotic than you are, or something like that. But I think your point that what he was saying was, all's fair in love and war, probably is more to the point. So your question, David.
And then the slow pace that the Democrats are taking in impeachment is perfect, because you have to get more and more of America on the side of the truth to dampen down the passion of these people. And from an astrology point of view, this is the year of the pig, born under the sign of honesty, straight to the point. And I told you before that I hope the truth about Trump comes out this year.
Yeah, well, I think it is, and I think it will, and excellent point, Saul. David, thanks a lot for the call. Jude in Birmingham, Alabama. Hey, Jude, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I was just wondering, when Adam Schiff was talking about manufactured evidence, was he trying to say that Trump was looking for someone to even make up out of whole cloth some evidence against Biden?
Yeah, in Trump's comments and all this sort of thing, he has never made it very, very clear that he does not want manufactured evidence. Basically what he said is, you find dirt on Biden and I'll give you the weapons. And, so if you're on the receiving end of that message, you may well think that you would have to manufacture dirt rather than simply look for dirt. So, yeah, I think that's what he's talking about. And it certainly seems that way to me. It seems like, Trump is just saying, bang, I just, that he wants to get reelected. He wants to stay out of jail. That's the bottom line. Mark, thank you much for the call. Jordan in Manhattan. Hey, Jordan, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how are you?
Good.
I'm a big fan of yours. I've been suffering from ADHD, and you're a big inspiration.
Thank you. I have a new book on ADHD, just came out this 2 weeks ago. It's called ADHD, Hunter in a Farmer's World, and it's a complete rewrite of my first book on that topic. So anyhow, we have a minute to the break. Jordan, what's up?
So I was just wondering, there's many students who struggle in schools. There are some of those students have ADHD and grow up to be successful entrepreneurs, successful hunters, whereas some of the other students, they sort of struggle and end up struggling the rest of their lives. What traits would you look for among students who struggle, like if you were betting, to pick the ones that end up being the successful entrepreneurs?
Well, having been one of those students, I think that resilience is the main thing, belief in yourself. And this is why it's so important for parents of ADHD kids to trust their kids, to not tell their kids stories like that they're just not trying hard enough and things like that, to have some understanding and frankly, self-image. Belief in oneself is so important for kids with ADHD to grow up to be functional adults. When they're told that they're damaged, and just telling them that they're damaged goods or that they've got a brain disease, just telling them that is a wounding in and of itself that can have lifelong consequences. So, I would counsel parents to be very careful about that. And what I've seen in myself and other people that I know with ADHD is that, the more you believe in yourself, the more likely you are to succeed.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We're doing Anything Goes Thursday because we've got this labor panel here tomorrow and won't be taking calls. So I'm live in Chicago, and I'll be back with your calls right after this. Our book today is The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America by a guy named Thom Hartmann. This is from the introduction, A Rebellion Against Monarchy. And it opens with a quote from Abraham Lincoln. The candid citizen must confess that if the policy of the government upon vital questions affecting the whole people is to be irrevocably fixed by decisions of the Supreme Court the instant they are made, then in ordinary litigation between parties and personal actions, the people will have ceased to be their own rulers, having, to that extent, practically resigned their government into the hands of that eminent Supreme Court tribunal. It's from his first inaugural speech, explaining why he was refusing to recognize Dred Scott. From the time Americans wake up in the morning throughout their days, work or play, right through a full night's sleep, everything they do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched in one way or another by the Supreme Court. Food, drugs, transportation, clothes, furniture, roadways, water, septic, electricity, everything in modern life is regulated in some way, either in manufacture, distribution, sale, or use. And those regulations are allowed or disallowed ultimately by the U.S. Supreme Court. At home and in the workplace, Americans' lives are regulated by the Supreme Court also, whether there can be a minimum wage or unemployment insurance, how much power employers have over labor unions and employees, whether consumers can sue when harmed by products or corporate actions, and how far police and other agencies can go in prosecuting, or sometimes persecuting, individuals or entire groups of people. The court determines and defines the limits of your right to protest and your right to a free press. It has final say in everything from taxation to regulation, from public space to private space, from contraception to marriage. Both directly and indirectly, the court determines how wealth can be earned, accumulated, and disposed of. It decides how far the rich can go in exploiting the poor and working people, and whether working people can fight back. Meanwhile, America has ended up, mostly since around 1980, with one of the most corrupted political systems in the developed world, with billionaires and big corporations literally writing legislation to benefit themselves, from the federal to state to local levels. As Tim Wu wrote for the New York Times in March 2019, quote, about 75% of Americans favor higher taxes for the ultra-wealthy. The idea of a federal law that would guarantee paid maternity leave attracts 67% support. 83% favor strong net neutrality rules for broadband, and more than 60% want stronger privacy laws. 71% think we should be able to buy drugs imported from Canada, and 92% want Medicare to negotiate for lower drug prices, end quote. Yet Congress as a whole has not even once seriously considered any of these things in decades. The reason, quite simply, is literally billions of dollars of politically poisonous cash flowing from corporations and ideologically motivated billionaires into the bloodstream of our body politic. And it wasn't Congress or any president in history who changed laws to make this possible. It was the Supreme Court. Right now, and throughout much of U.S. history, the ideological makeup of the U.S. Supreme Court has had little resemblance to the political makeup of our nation. In 2019, for instance, solid majorities of Americans supported a woman's right to access abortion and birth control, voting rights, a national health care system, well-funded public schools and free education through college, higher taxes on corporations to pay for infrastructure, and an expanded social safety net, and regulation of corporate behavior from pollution to banking. These are issues that enjoy majority support from working Americans and American communities, but not from corporate America or America's billionaires. As this book shows in parts 1 and 2, the court has historically almost always sided with the wealthy, the powerful, and the corporate against the poor, the weak, and the individual. In many cases, these decisions have struck down laws passed by Congress and signed by the president, a process called judicial review. This book answers the core questions about the Supreme Court's decisive role in determining the fate of the planet. Why did the framers create the Supreme Court? What is judicial review, and how does it make the Supreme Court what Thomas Jefferson, post-1803, called a despotic branch? How does the history of the U.S. Constitution explain the court's frequent decisions in favor of the wealthy and corporations? When has the court sided with popular opinion, and how have people successfully challenged the court in the past? How did a 20th century coalition of businesses and billionaires seize control of the American government, including the Supreme Court? And why is this now a planetary crisis? Most important, what can Americans do about all this? In the beginning, there were those among the founders and framers of the Constitution who didn't mean for the court to have this much power. Thomas Jefferson was among them. Part 1 of this book dives into the philosophies that guided the men who drafted the Constitution. It also shows how in 1803, the Supreme Court set itself above Congress and the president, with the power to review, strike down, or rewrite laws based on its own lone interpretation of the Constitution. Importantly, the framers of the Constitution gave no consideration to the rights of nature or even of the environment, other than its sheer productive potential to enhance the wealth of the nation. Instead of the environment, when the Constitution was written in the summer and fall of 1787, the new thing in political circles was the idea of property rights for commoners. which had only clearly been articulated outside of the realm of royal prerogatives during the previous few centuries. John Locke wrote in his 1689 Two Treatises of Government that the main purpose of government was to make sure that, quote, no one may take away or damage anything that contributes to the preservation of anyone else's life, liberty, health, limb, or goods. It's The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America by Thom Hartmann.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you live from Chicago. Tonight I'll be at Stream 265. We've got a gig there tonight. I'm going to be giving a talk about, the essence of it essentially is the United States a democratic republic or a constitutional monarchy? Now, I realize it sounds kind of wonky, but it has huge implications for everything we do and our form of government and everything else. And it's the essential argument or debate, I suppose, that I lay out in my book, my new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. Smart 265, 6 o'clock tonight. More information at WCPT820.com. So there's that. You'll recall back a week or so ago when the White House released the transcript of Trump's call with Zelensky, with the president of Ukraine, that I went on the air. I read the transcript, and there were 3 places in this transcript where there were ellipses. Ellipses are, 3 little dots, or an ellipsis is 3 little dots. There were 3 of these. There were 3 ellipses. And I pointed out, I'm a writer, right? Kind of the equivalent of an English major here. And I said, typically an ellipsis means that something has been omitted. I do this all the time with quotes from, some of the founders and the framers. They'll have this long paragraph and they'll start out saying, well, the Supreme Court should be, and then they'll wander off into some, other land, and then they'll come back and make their concluding point. And so I just cut the middle out and put ... and it makes sense that way. So anyhow, I went on the air and I said, I'm seeing ellipses in this thing. In fact, a number of you called, and one guy called and said, I think there's 5 of them. We double-checked. There were only 3. If you do a Control-F through the PDF, there were 5 spots, but it looks like 2 of them were just artifacts, or maybe there's more and they're buried. But in any case, each one of these 3 ellipses were at a point where the transcript, in my opinion, was just starting to get juicy, where he was talking about CrowdStrike, the company that told the DNC that Russians had invaded their server, where he was talking about the Biden family, and and his more general demand about what we want, what kind of dirt we want and how we want it and when we want it, and I tweeted about this. And a bunch of people tweeted back at me, and some of you called and said, well, no, sometimes an ellipsis just means somebody just trailed off. They didn't quite finish their sentence, or their voice dropped. And I said, well, in a transcript like this, and I realize it's not a transcript, it's notes, but, there was so much verbatim language in there that much of it actually was transcription. That in a transcript, typically if somebody's voice trails off or you can't understand what they're saying, you have a bracket in the word inaudible rather than an ellipsis. So I said, and also, if you read that transcript out loud, it runs about 10 to 12 minutes, even if you read slowly, which would be the case with simultaneous translation. But the call was 30 minutes, as I recall, maybe 20. But in any case, the call was about twice as long as the transcript was. And so I was like, there's stuff missing. And people were like, you're being paranoid, and there goes Hartmann again. Well, at the very top of the front page of today's Washington Post, now this is the electronic edition, I haven't seen the print edition, but this is literally at the very top of today's Washington Post. Odd markings fuel doubts about rough transcript of Trump-Ukraine call. And they're specifically pointing out, hey, there's ellipses in there. What the heck is going on? What is he hiding? What is he covering up? I think it's going to get a whole lot worse for Trump before it gets better. And one of the other interesting things that the New York Times is noting is that he has not put together a war room. I mean, when Clinton was impeached And for that matter, when Nixon was looking at impeachment, when impeachment hearings were going on with Nixon, in both cases, they brought in really high-powered lawyers, former members of Congress, constitutional experts. They also put together a media war room so that they could rebut any charges and always be on top of things and get stuff out there. Trump appears to just be doing this, shooting from the hip, which tells me and informs a number of the commentators out here that he really doesn't think that there's any chance he'll be convicted in the Senate. And so he's basically saying, go ahead, give me your best shot. And it's why he doubled down. Originally it was just like, trying to bribe Ukraine, and today he tried to bribe China. He's like, oh, you want a trade deal? Give me some dirt on Joe Biden's son. And I think that, at this point in time, given how timid all these Republican senators are, I mean, you've got two of them now, Chuck Grassley and Mitt Romney, who have said, well, that transcript is troubling. Right. That's, to go back to that analogy of the guy handing the ransom note to the bank teller, it's a little more than troubling. But that's as far as any Republicans have been willing to go. So, Trump may be onto something. However, I think what he's misunderstanding is the calendar. Is that, once these guys learn whether or not they're going to have a serious primary challenge, and once the window closes for primary challengers to file and, compile their funding, they're going to be looking around and saying, I don't think that this primary challenge is going to be a problem for me, and therefore I'm going to do what's right. Now, expecting Republicans to do what's right is always a bad bet, but we only need 20 of them, and there's a little over 50. I think there's 51 of them. So we'll see how it shakes out, but it's all coming down to Trump basically making this bet. And I think one of the things that is malinforming him is that he's getting his news from Breitbart and from right-wing online sources and from Fox News, and not from the Fox News people, but from the Fox, the commentary people, the Laura Ingrams and Sean Hannity's. Judge Napolitano, by the way, has now come out and said, yes, we need an impeachment inquiry. This looks illegal, which is very strange. So Trump is all upset about that. But as I said yesterday, if Fox turns on him, the game's over. So we'll see where it goes. Mike in Wickliffe, Ohio. Am I saying that right, Mike?
That's correct. Wickliffe, Ohio. Ohio, possibly the northernmost Confederate state in the Union. Professor, thank you for taking my call. And I hope when you're sitting with the labor leaders tomorrow, I hope that they will weigh in on another monster, the head of the Labor Department, Antonin Scalia's son. I hope you'll have a discussion about that. But to get to my point, Professor, I'm a retired operating engineer, and I've been retired for 6 years now, and I've been an avid, not only a watcher of your show, but Washington Journal on C-SPAN. Unfortunately, I'm pretty sad to hear the comments, the ignorance of the callers that call into a wide range of subjects on that show. And to me, now, understand that I have young children, I have younger grandchildren. And after reading books, especially Richard Evans wrote a 3-volume books about the Third Reich, and I know you're an expert on that too, I've come to the conclusion that the only way the American people, and I'm not advocating this, the only way that the American people are going to learn about this monster is they're going to have to learn the hard way. Much like Germany, the German people were brought to their knees until they realized their mistake. And as you pointed out, the hardliners, even as the Third Reich was dying, you brought up the point, and I've read it too, that when Adolf Hitler found out that the people were escaping to the subways, he flooded the subways, drowning his own people. This is terrifying. People don't realize how important things are today. Even my wife, who is still a teacher, she said to me this morning after watching this fire hose that was on the news yesterday, she said to me, she said, Mike, how are they going to write the history books about this? It's a absolutely terrifying situation that we're in, and people, they don't understand it. But the pain is going to come after, when all the judgeships that him and Mitch McConnell are filling, these Federalist Society people, the pain is going to come to my kids and my grandkids 30, 40 years down the line. The decisions that they're making.
I agree. And Mike, if I can jump in, because I just have 20 seconds left.
I'm sorry.
I gave a speech about this in Minneapolis, and no, it's all good. And for the people who attended the Blue State Ball, remember that I haven't talked about it much on the air, but I pointed out that Trump is acting like a cult leader, and he has followers who are behaving like cult followers. And the Nazi movement was a cult. The German Tojo's Japanese movement was a cult. And the cults had to be completely destroyed. You couldn't just kind of push them out of the way. You had to completely and utterly destroy them before the cult followers woke up from the dream that they were in. And that's been my concern for a long time with the Republican Party, is that we've got this cult going on here, and it's
come to Ohio.
Like where. Yeah, I'm sure. And what's it going to take to break the hold on them? I mean, So anyhow, we'll be right back. We'll be right back. Thom Hartmann here with you live from Chicago. Stick around. And welcome back, Kate in Los Angeles, listening to KPFK. Hey, Kate, what's up?
Yes, thank you, Tom, for everything you do. I believe that if it gets really bad for Trump and he feels that he's going to, lose his nastiness, that he's possibly a flight risk going to Saudi Arabia and has a hidey hole there.
Mm-hmm. I think it's not impossible that he will do what tin pot dictators have a long history of doing from all over the world. I was in Uganda in 1980, right after Idi Amin had fled to Saudi Arabia, and along with his 20-some-odd wives. And the Saudis put him up in a palace until the day he died, because he had converted to Islam and claimed that Uganda was an Islamic country. That's not at all unusual for these guys, and if he sees that that's the only way that he can keep his fortune, I think he may well. The question is, what's going to happen to his family? Will his family go with him? And the other thing is, he's in his mid-70s, so and he's in poor health. The guy's obese. He gets no exercise. You see him when he gets really cranked up and he starts sweating profusely and stuff like that. These are not the signs of somebody who is, physically healthy, much less psychologically healthy. But I think that he's a flight risk also, on the one hand. And I guess we would have to determine, is he going to do more harm here in the United States, starting his own TV network, which is what he was going to do, by the way, after he lost the White House. That was the business that they were putting together. Was a competitor to Fox News that he and Don Jr. were putting together. Is he going to go back to that business plan, or is Rupert Murdoch going to hire him on Fox News, or is he just going to be on the sidelines rhetorically throwing bombs at whoever comes into office, like he did with during the Obama presidency? It's really hard to know, but I think that your concern is legitimate, Kate. Kate, thanks a lot for the call. Jackie in Port Townsend, Washington. Hey, Jackie, what's up?
Hi, I just called my Representative Derek Kilmer, Patty Murray, and Maria Cantwell, my senators, all Democrats, to inquire about where I could go to see them at a town hall, because I thought that's why they were coming back. No town halls and no way to talk to them one-on-one.
Wow. I'm surprised. I mean, most of the Democrats are doing town halls. It may be, keep in mind, Washington State is kind of the epicenter of rural Washington State, the epicenter of the right-wing, the violent right-wing movement. It's that. I mean, that's where the group that assassinated Alan Berg, the talk show host, came from. Maybe it's a security thing. I don't know. But
I don't know. But it's really disappointing. And I thought that was why they were coming back. I hope you registered
your disappointment with them.
I did, and I'm going to follow up with.
You're going to follow up with. Whoop, Jackie went. Okay, good, Jackie. Good on you. I'm glad you called them. I'm glad you got it on the record, and I hope they listen to you. We'll be back. Thom Hartmann here with you. It's Anything Goes Thursday, live from Chicago. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here live from Chicago today. Mick in Seattle. Hey, Mick, what's on your mind today?
The children that are have not been released from those detention centers. I'm really upset with the fact that Trump's stealing the thunder away from that tragedy that's our concentration camps. And
7 of them have died. Let's not forget.
Yes, thank you for that. Thank you for interjecting that. In fact, they just had one reported today that had passed away because he wasn't able to get to the hospital in time. The other thing is that's really positive, though, is a bill is on the desk of the governor of California. Hopefully he'll sign it to close down for-profit prisons.
Yeah, hopefully. We'll see.
Hopefully.
But, it's...
But so, I can't.
Yeah, I
can't say enough.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I can't say enough about the fact that this is to me the second most important thing, and it's doable because we've had representatives from Congress go out there and see that these conditions are what they are, and I'm afraid we're creating dissidents from incarcerating these children and the trauma they're experiencing.
Yeah, and it's going to be a lifelong trauma, and we've already seen evidence of it, and some estimates of the number of children that Trump has separated who are in detention centers or otherwise separated from their parents right now. And these are children of people who are seeking asylum. They are not people who are here looking for a job. They are fleeing, in many cases, actual starvation in Guatemala, where the crops have failed for 5 years in a row. These children, that there may be as many as 20,000 of them in detention. This is a crime against humanity. There's no other way to describe it. Patrick in Jupiter, Florida. Hey, Patrick, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, how you doing? I'm having a problem with the VA right now, and what's going on is we always had a program called Choice, and with our Choice program, if we had a problem that couldn't be solved by the local VA, we could go to local doctors. Since January 1st, Donald Trump did away with the Choice program. He says that Choice is great, this and that he promoted it. All of it, they did away with it. They've hired a private insurance company called TriWest, and nobody in Palm Beach County accepts TriWest as a insurer. So I've got skin cancers from Agent Orange, and I can't even see a provider. They want me to go 100 miles away. So
that's insane. I know that this was something that was passed during the Obama administration, wasn't it?
That's another thing that he has tried to get rid of that President Obama put in place. The Choice had Obama's name on it.
Incredible.
Now we have no choice. It's gone.
Yeah.
And veterans don't
Patrick,
realize that
I'm
yet.
very sorry to hear that.
Veterans don't realize it.
Well,
the public doesn't realize it.
Spread the word.
Every time he's on stage, he lies about it. He says, "I got choice."
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And he says, yeah, I got choice. And no, it was Obama who got choice, number one. And basically this is for people who live, particularly for rural people who live, a ways away from a major VA hospital, that they can just go to their local doctor and still have it be funded through the VA. And I didn't know that Trump had restricted it. It doesn't surprise me at all. He's tried to undo absolutely everything Obama did. I thought this was the one thing that he wasn't going to undo, that he was simply going to lie about and take credit for, which is what he's been doing up to this point. But Patrick, I would encourage you to get very, very active on social media. There are a lot of veterans groups on Facebook. There are veterans, there's lots of ways to communicate with your fellow veterans. And I hope you are telling your story far and wide. Patrick, thank you for the call. I wish you the very best. Zach in Seattle. Hey, Zach, what's up?
Hey, Tom, love your show. Just wanted to talk to you about the documentary Get Me Roger Stone. It is available on Netflix right now. I've heard you brought it up, and it's a mind-blowing documentary. I just can't believe that he's gotten away with, the things that he did back in the 2016 election. And I just think it's and I wonder what his role in this whole Ukraine scandal is. And just kind of I don't know, he's been very quiet. Kind of curious on if you know any updates on him at all.
I don't have any updates on him, and I'm not sure that I've seen the Get Me Roger Stone documentary. I don't recall specifically. What I do recall is Client Number 9, which is the documentary about the former governor of New York State, Elliot. What was Elliot's last name? In any case, and Roger Stone played a big role in. Yeah, Elliot Spitzer, thank you. Roger Stone played a big role on behalf of a billionaire that Spitzer was investigating in illegally getting information about Spitzer to the media and to prosecutors. So, he's been around this block more than once. He's an old-time dirty trickster. It's why he's got Richard Nixon tattooed on his back. But, Zach, I don't have any updates. I'm sorry. It probably would be a good idea to find out what's going on. Noah in Newport Richey, Florida. Hey, Noah, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I guess what's on my mind is that impeachment seems to be taking away the focus on issues that are really affecting the American people. Healthcare, things like unions, and climate change, most importantly. We don't have much time to act on that. And I've gotten with my representative, and surprisingly, he's a Republican who believes in anthropogenic climate change. And I've gotten with him, and we're working on possibly getting a 100% renewable energy bill written up sometime here in the near future. But now we have to consider impeachment and how that's going to kind of eat up the time on the House floor to get anything introduced.
Well, when they were impeaching Nixon, there was major legislation passed. I believe the legislation authorizing the EPA was passed, or at least one of the, Clean Air, Clean Water Acts. I mean, there was some very, very major legislation that was passed. There was major legislation passed when Bill Clinton was being impeached. So the problem isn't, I don't think, the impeachment inquiry. It's taking stuff off the front page of the newspapers. I'll give you that. The problem is that over 200 pieces of legislation have already been passed, including climate change legislation, out of the House of Representatives, and they're dying at Mitch McConnell's feet. He's just killing this stuff. So that's where we should be focusing our ire. We'll be back with Anything Goes Thursday, live from Chicago. Thom Hartmann here with you. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Our book today is Future War, Preparing for the New Global Battlefield by Robert, I believe it's pronounced Latif, Latiff. This is from the introduction. On a sweltering August day following weeks of heightened tension with Russia over its actions in Ukraine and Syria, and harsh words between the United States and China over actions in the South China Sea, and as workers are preparing to depart the cool of their air-conditioned Manhattan office buildings for the gridlocked highways and subways, several large electric power plants along the East Coast simultaneously experienced dramatic overspeed conditions in their large turbine generators. Plant operators are unable to stop the steam turbines, whose automatic control and data systems have been infected by sophisticated computer malware, and they catastrophically tear themselves apart, cutting power to large segments of the population and industries in the Northeast. Building systems shut down, hospitals switch to emergency generators, trains stop running, traffic lights cease operating, and Wall Street trading comes to a halt. At the same time, 1,100 miles to the south, a massive rocket sits fueled and ready to launch a critical national security satellite when an explosive-laden private aircraft flies at low altitude into the Cape Canaveral launch pad area and, despite repeated warnings, slams into the pressurized fuel tank and solid rocket motors, creating an enormous conflagration. Half a world away, elite commandos equipped with the latest high-technology equipment but unidentifiable as a national army attack U.S. and allied interests near areas of disputed territory. Thus are fired the opening shots of a new war. These hypothetical events represent a radically different style of conflict fought with new tools and against new and unfamiliar enemies. When most people think of war, they imagine soldiers doing battle with other soldiers, employing tanks, artillery, and other recognizable weapons. However, in this century, war has morphed into something we can scarcely recognize, and future conflicts will be qualitatively and quantitatively unlike those of the past. They will be fought using innovative and unusual weapons, many of which, because the technologies have both civilian and military uses, will be available to far more people who are far less skilled in their employment. The so-called democratization of technology has diminished the monopoly of advanced countries on the tools of war. 21st century armed conflicts often have no battlefield in the traditional sense. The concept of opposing armies clashing in deadly struggle but moderated by international conventions of behavior seems a thing of the past. In 1999, Chinese colonels Kuo Liang and Wang Shuangshui predicted that soldiers would increasingly be computer hackers, financiers, drug smugglers, and agents of private corporations rather than members of a military, and that their weapons would include not only airplanes, cannons, poison gas bombs, and biochemical agents, but also computer viruses, net browsers, and financial derivative tools. Their predictions were prescient. Yesterday's wars were, like World War II, about saving civilized nations from maniacal dictators, or like the conflicts in Vietnam and Korea, devoted to a clash of ideologies in the attempt to limit the spread of one hegemon over another. They were big affairs involving large military forces and enormous violence. Today's wars are more about cultural and religious hatreds, using violence as a means to change the hearts and minds of people, among whom the killing occurs with more frequency. Tomorrow's wars will be different still, fought largely for political dominance with stealth and cunning, targeting innocents and institutions, heavily dependent on information superiority, and employing strange new weapons. While we have a highly motivated and well-trained and equipped armed forces that will adapt, we are not prepared as a nation to react well to the inevitably messy and ambiguous situations these new conflicts and weapons will present. We still have no clear idea of what constitutes an act of war in cyberspace now, nor of how we might respond to such an act. It is not enough for the military to be prepared. Neither the public nor its decision makers have yet fully comprehended the significance of the changes in the types of conflict and the tools with which they will be fought. Without question, there will be circumstances when decision makers will find it necessary, or at least think it necessary, to send soldiers into classic boots-on-the-ground combat situations. We will continue to project force with our powerful aircraft, our munitions, and our aircraft carrier strike groups. When war is fought in foreign lands, it could well be against other high-tech armies. However, war will increasingly be more personal and often fought closer to home. It will not lend itself to the traditional massive displays of U.S. firepower. It will affect individuals directly, not as some distant conflict we read about in newspapers or watch in the movies or on the internet. Americans will be targeted on U.S. soil, often, as we have seen in San Bernardino and Orlando, by homegrown terrorists. This form of war will be messy and complex, and it will not lend itself to easy, quick, soundbite solutions. It may not even be clear for a while who perpetrated the violence against us. Was it state-sponsored or a random act of terror? Will we unleash massive destruction on foreign countries in retaliation for attacks by terrorists residing on our own soil? If so, to what end and with what consequences? There are always consequences, whether they be the death or capture of our own troops, unnecessary civilian casualties, or the incitement of more violence. The book Future War by Robert Latif. So every 5 years, the U.S. Department of Agriculture comes out with new guidelines, and we just put up a video over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program that talks about how the Trump administration, in this insanely corrupt deal with the $100 billion industry of ultra-processed, high-sugar, high-salt, high-fat foods that is literally killing 700,000 Americans a year, has said, oh, we're going to change the guidelines so that these fast food, high-processed food companies can shovel their stuff into our school lunch programs, into our kids. We're going to change the guidelines so people aren't informed about the importance of, dialing back somewhat on meat and on salt and sugar and all these other things. It's nuts. You can check the whole thing out over at thomhartmann.com. Look for the video for our, the supporters of our program at thomhartmann.com.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
The hidden history of guns in the Second Amendment.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back from Chicago. Tonight I'll be at, where am I going to be? It's Stream, I always get it wrong, Smart 265 in Carroll Stream here in Chicago. More information at WCPT820.com. I'll be talking about my new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. And Joyce Vance, boy, this is amazing. Former federal prosecutor just tweeted this in response, and it's the top story at the New York Times and the Washington Post as well, in response to Donald Trump saying in front of the TV cameras, basically, China, if you're listening, find me some dirt on the Bidens, and I will give you the trade deal that you want. Joyce Vance tweets, Trump just committed a felony violation of law by soliciting something of value in connection with a U.S. election from a foreign government or national. On national TV. And then she quotes the law. It's 52 U.S. Code, Section 30121. Violating the law is not necessary for impeachment, but it certainly warrants it. And then she links to a thing about the U.S. Code from the Cornell University's law school. She goes on to say the statute, the law, requires knowledge your conduct is a crime. Now, you could argue, and this is me now, not Joyce, you could have argued back when Trump, during the campaign in 2016, said, Russia, if you're listening, I think that the press will richly reward you if you can find Hillary Clinton's emails. You could argue that he really didn't realize that saying that was a crime. But after he said that, and after it came out, and after it was done and everything else, there's no way he doesn't know that it's a crime. And so back to Joyce Vance. She says, after the Mueller investigation, there's no way Trump was unaware that this violates the law. Basically, he's saying Ukraine, China, can you hear me, is even worse than Russia, if that's possible, because it comes from a sitting president. Of course, before it was a presidential candidate. She goes on in her third tweet, she says, campaign finance crimes also require a thing of value to be involved. But as Federal Election Commission Chair Ellen Weintraub recently said, you don't have to be able to assign a dollar amount. But in the case of Ukraine, Trump did this. The help he sought was worth $400 million in U.S. aid, and that's a felony. And she's absolutely right. It absolutely is a felony. So It's getting weirder and weirder by the minute. And as I said, anything goes Thursday today. Because tomorrow we're going to be doing a fascinating labor panel. We've got some great people on. We're not just going to be talking about labor. We're going to be talking about the news of the day and impeachment and politics and all kinds of stuff with some great guests. And you'll hear all about that. You'll meet them tomorrow, and which is part of the reason why I'm here in Chicago also to do this book signing tonight. But so therefore, right now we're doing Anything Goes Thursday. And just a heads up, because I'm on remote, there's about a second delay between the time that you finish talking and I hear you finish talking, or between the time that I finish talking and you hear me finish talking. So there will be this 1 second pause on both of our ends, and don't let that unnerve you. It's just, that's the way it is. And if you want to jump in and interrupt or something, if it's really important, just go ahead and do it, and don't stop just because you continue to hear me talking, because I will stop, and hopefully I'll, the same thing on your end. So, Gail in Seattle. Hey, Gail, what's on your mind today?
Good morning, Tom. I'd appreciate your thoughts on what I think is an important move for Biden right now. For the good of the country, he should remove himself from the Democratic candidates for president. This does not mean an admission of guilt, but in a long career of missteps, this is going to overtake all the debate and essentially block any serious discussion. We need to deny the major points of attack from the Republicans now. Could you please respond and give us your thoughts?
Sure, Gail. I get your logic, and that is that this is wounding Biden, and in fact it's showing up in the polls. It's wounding Biden, and it'll continue to wound Biden, and it'll continue to get worse as more and more people learn about this. And Gail, thank you for the call, by the way. And we had a New York Times reporter on the program earlier in the week, Kurt Eichenwald, who was talking about how he actually did the research for either the Times or for Newsweek. I think he works for Newsweek now, into exactly why Hunter Biden was put on the board of that Ukrainian gas company. And it was part of an effort according to Kurt Eichenwald, it was part of an effort to try to clean up the company. That it wasn't just Hunter Biden who was put on the board. It was also the Cofer Black, former head of counterterrorism for the U.S. CIA, and it was the former president of Poland, a democratically elected, relatively progressive former president. The current president, Mr. Duda, is basically a Polish version of Donald Trump, but the former president was put on there. So it was a good thing, or at least that's his understanding of it. But nobody is trying to sell it that way. Even Biden is not talking about it that way. He's not trying to defend himself. And so the what could be a positive narrative isn't getting out. But what is getting out, in fact, I heard it on NPR this morning, in my hotel room here in Chicago. What is getting out is that, boy, does this look bad. Here you've got the son of a vice president, while the guy is vice president, getting a gig at a gas company when he has no experience in gas and being paid $50,000 a month for doing it. And I don't disagree that this is going to hurt Joe Biden and is hurting Joe Biden badly. But I don't think that I don't think that we should be calling for him to step down. I think that we should let the primaries play out. I am guessing that Biden is not going to be the party's nominee. Clearly, Donald Trump thinks he will be. Clearly, many of the Republicans think Biden's going to be the party's nominee, the Democratic Party's nominee. And that's why he's continuing to, beg for information, unless he's just trying to say to all of us, basically, I can do whatever I want, or, some variation on that. But anyhow, that's what's going on. John in Seattle. Hey, John, you wanted to weigh in on this?
Yeah, I have a very similar concern. Not exact concern is that in not addressing what happened with the Bidens. I don't know the details, but it may not have been illegal, but it certainly, as you said, looks bad, and it talks about, it goes to the point of politicians, peddling influence or their family members, and if we don't address that, or if we just focus on Trump and we don't say, we got to we got to address this with our principles, as in that's corruption as well. It's certainly not impeachable. I support the impeachment of Trump. You know, he's horrible, etc. But we can't make this a partisan issue with the Bidens and say, you know, we're just not going to talk about that. We're just going to talk about Trump. What's your thoughts on that?
No, I agree, John. I think the Democrats have to acknowledge that it doesn't look good. And by the way, the second half of this, and I was surprised yesterday that Mark Pocan didn't know about this. Apparently, Hunter Biden, and I frankly don't have the details. You know, I've read a couple of stories about it, but it's been over a month. But apparently, he was also part of or a principal in a hedge fund or an investment fund that had over $1.5 billion, and he went with his dad to China and solicited a bunch of money for the fund from Chinese oligarchs, Chinese billionaires. And that looks bad. And that's what Donald Trump keeps talking about. I mean, this is all over the right wingosphere. It's not like I'm peddling, you know, dirt on the family or those kinds of things. This is literally all over the place. And you know, every right-wing talk show host is talking about it right now. In all probability, Fox News is all over it, and you know, it does look bad. But the process is not for us to say, Joe, you got to step down. The process is to have you know, another debate, continue the process, and you know, early next year you're going to see. I believe it's in February. Could be wrong, might be March, but in the late winter, early spring of next year, you're going to see the Iowa caucuses, and California is going to be one of the early states. You're going to New Hampshire and whatnot. Let's let this process play out.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We're doing Anything Goes Thursday here, live from Chicago, because tomorrow we're doing a labor panel, which is going to be equally fascinating. Picking up your calls right after this. And welcome back, Mark in Valley, Washington. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind today?
Greetings from the heart of Eastern Washington, right-wing hate land.
Okay.
I'm just 38 miles north of Spokane. Did I not hear on your program that there's a live fire neo-Nazi training camp up here somewhere?
Yeah, there is.
Oh. And did I also not hear that the Oath Keepers say they're ready to go with this Civil War if it happens?
Yes, they have.
Okay, because I've had this discussion with you before, and we've been on opposite sides. I keep telling people that people on the left better get prepared, because...
Yeah, you're saying the people on the left should arm themselves.
I think they should, at least for self-defense, if no other reason. Trump's not going to leave without inciting some kind of violence. That's my personal feeling.
He's already incited violence. I mean, the guy who went down to El Paso and killed over 20 Hispanics did so specifically. I mean, he cited Trump. He traveled hundreds of miles specifically to go to a border town and kill people of you know, Mexican ancestry. It's already here, Mark. I get what you're saying. I'm not willing to. I think it would be irresponsible for me, you know, having the platform that I have, to recommend that people arm themselves, number one. Number two, having a gun in your home increases by 500% the probability that there's going to be a death in your home, and it's not going to be a bad guy. It'll be suicide, it'll be an accident, or it could be homicide, particularly you know, in domestic disputes. I don't think
let me just say, there's no young kids around my house, so that's the one worry I don't have.
Well, I'm not telling you shouldn't have a gun. I'd be the last person to tell anybody that. But I think it would be irresponsible of me to recommend to just, you know, average people that, hey, it's time to arm yourself because the right-wingers are coming. I think that's a very dangerous message to be passing along. So I guess we'll continue to disagree. Mark, thank you for the call. I certainly get your concern. I totally get your concern. Will in Olympia, Washington. Hey, Will, what's up?
Oh, good morning, Tom. You had a guest on, or a caller on a half an hour ago, perhaps, who was from Washington State, like myself, Olympia, Washington, who said that she couldn't get a hold of Maria Cantwell and Patty Murray for information on their town halls, if any. And I am in Olympia, 10th Congressional District, Denny Heck, Democrat, and I in between then and now, I called his office, and yet again, since 2013, they won't tell me if or when he's having a town hall in the state. I have my.
Well, that
I was redistricted.
That should be a
and
clue, Will,
Adam Smith
that
here.
maybe he should have a primary challenger.
Well, once he's in there, it's going to be tough to drag him out. But he's a Democrat.
I get that.
I'm a progressive, but I am pretty darned upset about that guy.
Yeah, we've got the same problem with Kurt Schrader in Portland. I mean, it's these guys. They're doing fundraisers, they're doing private meetings and things. They're doing those kinds of things, but they're not doing public town halls. And this is universal across the Republican Party. It is nowhere near as universal among the Democratic Party. And I'm sad to hear that. I'm saddened by that. Will, thanks a lot for the call and thanks for the information. We'll be right back. Anything Goes Thursday here on the Thom Hartmann Program, live from Chicago from WCPT. We'll be right back. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. .com, and you can get Anything Goes Thursday, live from Chicago. And Ed in Madison, Wisconsin. Hey, Ed, what's on your mind today?
First of all, welcome to the great Midwest.
Thank you. I love the Midwest. I grew up in Michigan. I'm home.
In the Second World War, Hitler refused to allow his troops to surrender. He forced them to shoot people who were trying to surrender to the Americans or the Allied troops. He seemed to feel that German people did not deserve to survive the war, and he seemed to go out of his way to destroy the infrastructure and all of society. I'm wondering if that is in our future.
That is my biggest fear, Ed. I don't talk about it a lot. I mentioned it yesterday once. I don't want to pound on it too much, but I think that we all need to seriously consider what might happen. Jim Jones, Adolf Hitler, Tojo, these guys, these cult leaders, when they see that they are going down, very often they try to take their followers with them, or in the case of Hitler, their country with them. And
that is the fear that I have.
Yeah, and what form that might take, whether Trump would just take down his party, which seems to be happening now, or whether he would try to get us into a war. North Korea, I don't know if you caught the news, just yesterday launched another missile. This missile had a warhead that was capable of separating into multiple parts. It did so just off the coast of Japan. Japan is totally freaked out. Trump said that Kim had told him he was not going to develop those kind of warheads. This was launched from a submarine rather than from the ground. North Korea's technological abilities are leapfrogging. They're moving forward really, really rapidly. Their offensive abilities. And, where that goes and what Trump does with that, whether he tries to get us into a war with Iran, which could very, very quickly turn into a world war, since Iran is an ally with Russia and has an economic alliance with China. And that war would almost instantly involve Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia is an ally with us. We fortunately don't have a mutual defense treaty with Saudi Arabia, but right now we're providing them with weapons and money to bomb the crap out of Yemen and killing thousands and thousands of children. There's 1 million people at risk of starvation, hundreds of thousands who literally are starving to death right now as we speak. There's the world's largest cholera epidemic happening in Yemen because Mr. Bonesaw is having his little war against the Shias there. This is all about Sunni Shia. The Houthi are Shia, and of course the Iranians are Shia. So and people say, well, that's just religion. Look at what happened in Ireland between the Catholics and the Protestants for years and years and years. So yeah, I am very concerned.
It's scary, isn't it?
Go ahead. Yeah.
I say
it really
is a pretty scary concept.
It is, and I hope that the military people around Donald Trump are taking this seriously and are as concerned about it as the rest of us, because I think that this has the potential to be a real disaster. Ed, thank you very much for the call. Jason in Buckeye, Arizona. Hey, Jason, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom, first-time caller. My whole deal is with these people saying that Joe Biden should step down, they're making a huge mistake, because I honestly think this is what Trump wants. I think Trump wants Biden out of the paint because he knows he's very good with the black vote and the independent vote. And yes, sure, I think Elizabeth Warren will do very well with the Democrat base, but I think we need to work on the independents. And I just don't see Elizabeth Warren really getting the independent vote that we really need to get us over to beat Trump.
Yeah. I heard a commentator this morning saying that the market was going down yesterday because Warren's going up in the polls. That's complete BS. That's just a simple lie. I mean, the market went down yesterday because the FTSE, the London market crashed, and the London market crashed because the world economy was slowing down. And frankly, if Elizabeth Warren gets in, this is, I don't know if you have been following Mark Zuckerberg. They leaked a conversation that he had with some of his employees where he said that if Warren was elected president, he was going to go to the mattresses. He was going to go to war with her because she's talked about breaking up some of the big tech companies, which would include Facebook, maybe making them divest themselves of Instagram and stuff like that. But the simple reality is that when AT&T was broken up, if you owned one share of AT&T stock, you ended up owning 7 shares of the various Bell companies plus Lucent Labs or Lucent Technologies, what used to be called Bell Labs. And over a 3-year period, you would have doubled your money. So breaking up big companies actually increases shareholder value. There's all kinds of histories proving that. But to the larger point that you're pointing out, what you're suggesting is that Trump is trying to do what Nixon did. Nixon knew that he couldn't beat Ed Muskie. And so he sent Chuck Colson up to Maine to do some dirty tricks on Muskie and take Muskie down, which was successful. So he ended up going against McGovern in 1972. McGovern was a much weaker candidate. And so you're suggesting that Biden is the strong candidate, that Trump is trying to take down Biden so that he has to go up against Warren, who would be a weaker candidate. I don't know if that math is correct. And, I'm not sure that the polls right now are going to be an indication of what the polls are at Election Day. But, it's worth considering. I frankly think, and then Jason, thanks for the call. I frankly think that Elizabeth Warren, or Bernie Sanders, will have no problem beating Donald Trump right now. I think he's so vulnerable.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Now, where the math changes radically is if between now and, say, March of next year, we have President Pence, then a lot changes.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Years of strategy and struggle against the prison industrial complex. It's a collection of essays. This one is by David Gilbert on page 31, titled "The System Within the System, the Prison Industrial Complex and Imperialism." For those of us held behind locked gates within the walls and fences topped with razor wire, the corrections regime is the system that works tirelessly to impose total control over every aspect of our lives. Yet as ponderous and powerful as prisons are, they're only one part, a central girder, of a much bigger and more foreboding house of horrors, which can most accurately be named imperialism. The structural needs of the larger edifice set the specifications for the size and position of the girder. The strength of the girder helps determine how long the building itself will stand. We can't understand the explosion of imprisonment in the United States since 1971 without looking at an imperialism's urgent needs and goals of that period. By the same token, we can't develop an effective program around the prison industrial complex without grappling with the stresses and trends of the larger system of imperial rule. To be clear, before you take time to read this chapter, I don't offer any brilliant ideas on strategy. Those will most likely emerge from the organizing and activist efforts themselves. However, some of the concerns discussed may raise questions that go into forming strategy. I definitely look forward to learning from the dialogues that this generates on these issues. Imperialism may sound like the kind of rhetoric we want to avoid, but it's one word that needs to be rescued as the best way to name the system that rules over us. The basis of imperialism is the relentless quest for profits around the globe. Its most striking characteristic is the colossal and grotesque polarization of wealth. That polarization happens between nations, between the rich countries of the North and the impoverished ones of the global South, the impoverished countries of Africa, Latin America, and parts of Asia, and at the same time within each country based on class, race, and gender. The poles of dazzling wealth and abject poverty are intimately linked, as the former results from the ruthless plunder of the latter. This system is built on and intensifies all the major forms of oppression, patriarchy, capitalism, and white supremacy, all of which are structurally central. At the same time, imperialism highlights the global character of the system in a way that explains why the most intense oppression and resistance have been in the South, and that also provides the context for why the liberation struggles of the various people of color have been in the forefront within the U.S. There's no way to capture what the system costs in human life and potential, the pain and loss for all of us. Close to 1 billion human beings suffer chronic hunger, while another 2 billion face nutritional deficiencies. 1 billion lack access to clean drinking water. Just looking at children under the age of 5, imperialism is a holocaust in progress. Over 9 million die every year from easily preventable causes associated with poverty. The price for future generations may be even more severe as the rapaciousness of this global frenzy for profits threatens the very ecological basis for sustaining human life on any scale on our planet. Since most people won't accept living in squalor amid plenty, imperialism entails both the most sophisticated and the most brutal forms of social control. Its most salient feature is war after war after war, mainly against the peoples of the South. The domestic front line of such repression is a truly violent and harmful prison industrial complex. Today, 2,300,000 people are held behind bars, about 7 times the number in 1971. That explosion was unprecedented, coming after a 70-year period when the rates of imprisonment had remained more or less constant. This dramatic change did not result from some sudden skyrocketing of criminal activity, but rather from a radical expansion of what was designated as a crime and a draconian increase in the punishments for those crimes. Such extreme measures were driven by considerations way beyond criminal justice and often at cross purposes to the proclaimed goal of public safety. These destructive changes were born from crisis, one much more severe and protracted than the periodic ups and downs of the business cycles that occur over a roughly 10-year period, but rather a situation that threatened the very survival of the system. Such structural crises occur because capitalism is by its nature unstable. The economy is vast and complicated, but the major decisions are made by a tiny corporate and financial elite, with each thinking only of his own profits. When a structural crisis develops, the long-term institutional arrangements that assured a reliable flow of profits and the rule of capital no longer function. One dramatic example was the Great Depression of the 1930s, followed by World War II. At the end of that period, a new set of international institutions, such as the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, were created. At the same time, a new deal was hammered out for the terms of the bargain between capital and labor within the U.S. Those arrangements worked well for capital until they broke down a generation later. That new structural crisis, which emerged between 1968 and 73, is the seedbed for the burgeoning of the prison industrial complex and many related changes in U.S. history. The first and most obvious signs were political, as the resistance to imperialism crested in 1968. Abolition now. It was handpicked. Of course, Trump is not carrying out this indoctrination single-handedly through his Twitter account. The book, The Cult of Trump. Thom Hartmann cruise will be sailing in July of 2020. The 7-day Oceania cruise will be going to Bermuda, and I'll be hosting onboard events about the topics of the day. More info at thomhartmann.com or 800-856-1155. Welcome back from Chicago, where I am live out of the studios of Chicago's Progressive Talk, WCPT. I don't know if you caught this. I heard this morning on NPR, and I was just like, whoa. It brought tears to my eyes. Botham Jean, or Jean, is the young black man who was shot to death by Amber Geyer, the white Dallas police officer who walked into the wrong apartment. She walked into his apartment thinking that it was her apartment. And he was sitting, watching television and eating ice cream, unarmed, all alone in his own apartment. Apparently the big mistake he made was leaving his door unlocked. She walked in, I mean, to the extent that there was a mistake, I don't mean to imply any blame to him at all, but I mean, that's how she was able to walk in. And she immediately pulled out her gun and shot him dead. And, which is a terrible, terrible thing. And she was convicted of murder, which is exactly what it was. And at the sentencing hearing, they were asking for the family, for Botham Jean's family, or Jean's family, to make statements. And his brother, Brant Jean, got up and said that he said that God loves you. I'm doing all this from memory, basically paraphrasing. He said basically, God loves you and I love you just like I would love anyone else. And I'm not going to say that I hope that you rot and die like my brother did. But I personally want what is best for you. And then he asked the judge if he could have permission to hug her. And the judge granted that permission, and she jumped up, and he walked over, and these two people hugged each other for a long, long time, a long embrace, and she just was sobbing with her head on his shoulder as they were holding each other, and they were both crying. I mean, he had lost his brother. She's going to spend 10 years in prison. There are people suggesting that that's nowhere near a long enough sentence, that had it been a black man killing a white woman, that it would have been life, and that's almost certainly true in Texas. And that's, a debate for another time, I suppose. I think all of our sentencing guidelines have gotten radically too harsh since the Reagan era. But that's, in any case, this is just so touching, so meaningful. Meanwhile, speaking of death, Gabe Ortiz over at Daily Kos is writing that ICE has started its new fiscal year, the annual fiscal year. The government year starts on October 1st. And it is October 3rd, another new death on ICE's watch. So far, this was a 37-year-old man from Cameroon, and it's the first death in ICE custody in the new fiscal year, which started Tuesday. It is the 25th death in ICE custody, including 7 children. This is, just terrible, terrible news. And then over on DU, which is a great site, democraticunderground.com. I visit there regularly, and we used to post there regularly. I did a rant a while back where Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was saying that the detention camps, the ICE detention camps, are concentration camps. And I was reading what she had to say, and I was reading what other people had to say. And at the very end, I said, and I completely agree with her. But for the 2 or 3 minutes of the clip,
it was just, I was just reading what people said, including what she said. And for some reason, the folks at DU thought that I was, in fact, one of them trashed it and said, this is right-wing propaganda, and bounced us, literally bounced the clip off the site, which just, it's like, really? Just scroll to the end and listen to what I said. She's right. She's absolutely right. These are concentration camps. I went through this thing about, I lived in Germany, and there's a difference between a concentration camp and a death camp. And she wasn't saying that they were death camps like Auschwitz. She was saying they were concentration camps like Dachau. And although I was the one who was saying Dachau, not her. And I don't get how anybody could have misconstrued what I said, but it's kind of sad. I got emails from a couple of people who were with DU saying, our moderators think that you're a right-winger now or something. It's weird. But anyhow, over at Democratic Underground, Kim HL2B has posted a post of a tweet from Kim Wexler's ponytail that's just absolutely brilliant. And I saw, Nancy Pelosi do her press conference yesterday, and I was like, what's with this? And then, the penny kind of dropped that Trump was going to do a press conference because he had a foreign leader there. He had the president of Finland. So anyhow, this tweet, Pelosi at war, number 1, checks Trump's schedule, sees meeting with foreign leader, knows Trump will hold a press conference. Number 2, schedules her own presser ahead of his because she knows he'll watch and stew. Number 3, Trump predictably baited, melts down on live television. Advantage? Pelosi. Yeah, you think so? But anyhow, it's Anything Goes Thursday. And Elizabeth in Monroe, Michigan. Hey, Elizabeth, what's on your mind today?
Hey, hi, Tom. I haven't talked with you in a while, and thanks for taking my call. So many topics, but the one I called in about, I'd like your help to understand and maybe some advice on where to go from here. There's been a fund set up for people who've been damaged by exposure to Roundup that contains glyphosate. Right. And so it's a proven fact that this causes cancer. Well, okay, then how come we can't have a class action lawsuit as Americans for what Monsanto has done to our staple food crops? They've genetically engineered them so that they would be susceptible to the glyphosate that would kill the weeds and stuff. So we're being inundated with this glyphosate. If they've already proved it's cancer-causing, what's going on?
What's going on is that the Trump administration is, and frankly, previous administrations, we've known this for some time. The European Union, I believe it was during the Obama administration, declared glyphosate a probable carcinogen. I think this is one of the reasons that Monsanto's... I think we've been able to prove it for some time. I think this is one of the reasons why Monsanto sold itself to Bayer, and Bayer didn't realize what they were buying, that they were buying all this liability. And now we know that there's glyphosate in our beer, there's glyphosate in our bread, there's glyphosate in anything made with any grains, because they use glyphosate now not just to kill weeds, but they're now using it before harvesting. They spray it on the wheat crop so that the wheat dies and the stalks become brittle, so that the threshing machines, they used to lose about 10 or 15% of the crop because the green, grass stalks holding the heads of wheat would kind of gum up the threshing machines. And now they spray the glyphosate on, and then they wait 3 days and they harvest it. And by that time, the wheat stalks are all brittle and they pop right off. And so they're getting more wheat. But because it was sprayed just before it was harvested, the stuff is just saturated with it. It's throughout our food supply, and I'm convinced that this explosion of gluten sensitivity that we're seeing all across the country is a direct result of glyphosate, because glyphosate was originally brought to market as an antibiotic. It kills bacteria, but it also, the same mechanism, the same way that it interrupts a metabolic process inside bacteria and causes them to die, is how it also kills some weeds. And so the theory, one of the working theories right now, and there was an interesting piece published over at the National Institutes of Health recently that I sent to my daughter, who's a nurse practitioner, and said, what do you think of this? And she was like, whoa. That suggests that the glyphosate is interrupting or interfering with the ability of the good bacteria in our gut to stay alive and do its thing. And the result of that could be not just the gluten intolerance, not just gas and diarrhea and stuff like that people get when they eat wheat now, but also could be that bad bacteria are starting to proliferate in our gut, and that leads to that leads to obesity, because it turns out that the good bacteria actually secrete hormones that tell our body, I'm full now. And I think it's called leptin. And so, I mean, this could be huge. It could be that glyphosate isn't just causing cancer. It could be that it's causing obesity indirectly, and it's causing IBS, and it's causing, all these other things. So, what Louise and I have done, obviously we've taken wheat out of our diet. I haven't been able to eat wheat for almost 2 decades now. But, just eating nothing but organic. But, we can afford to do that. Most people can't. And I think that if you look at the explosion of obesity in the United States, it follows Roundup. If you look at the explosion of gluten sensitivity or celiac disease, it follows how many tons of glyphosate are being sprayed on our food every year. I'm very concerned about this. And now you've got lawyers on TV saying if you or somebody in your family was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is the one type of cancer that they have proven glyphosate can cause, and this is tens of thousands of Americans. If you're one of them, call our law firm and we will sue on your behalf. And Monsanto, now Bayer, has apparently set aside the number, I think, was $18 billion. Maybe it was $8 billion. Some mind-boggling amount of money to cover these settlements. So it's coming. In terms of the class action, Elizabeth, that would be a question to ask a lawyer who does that kind of stuff. I don't know the answer to the question. But typically class action lawsuits don't return the kind of, really big settlements. There may be a big grand settlement, but the lawyers end up with most of it. In this case, it's going to the individuals. Elizabeth, thank you for the call, and thanks for raising that topic. It's an important one. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's Anything Goes Thursday from Chicago, and Bob Ney is hanging out with the Dalai Lama for 3 weeks, so we're skipping Talk Media News. You'll have me right after the break. And welcome back. Is it Horatio or Horatio in San Diego? Horatio.
Yes,
hey,
it's
what's
Horatio
up?
or whatever you want. Yes, I was calling from that guy that. Oh, I'm sorry. I was calling because of that guy that said that we should all get guns and stuff like that, all Democrats. Mm-hmm. And that is the dumbest thing I ever heard. If they can pass through the gangs, the drug dealers, and the hookers and the pimps and the tweakers, let them come. Let them come. You know what I mean? If they think they could just walk into an inner city and they think that people are not, going to do anything, I feel comfortable and safe that there's gang members out there right now, because if a militia, like a white militia, will come, boy, they wouldn't even know, especially if they go to L.A. Let this white militia try even to go into East L.A. We don't need guns. Trust me, there's people out there that they would have to first cross before they can even touch normal people. So people out there in the United States, don't worry. There's other people that they'll take care of. Thank God for gangs. Let's put it that way, Tom. And can I say, how come everything is an answer to white people with guns? Why is it always the answer?
Yeah. I don't think more guns are the answer to guns at any level, arming teachers or arming people. I mean, this was a white guy who lives in a rural part of Washington State where there's other white guys with guns, and he feels threatened. I get why he feels threatened and how he feels threatened, and people in my business have been assassinated by those very guys. Alan Berg, the talk show host out of Denver, it gives me pause. But I don't think that carrying a gun is going to protect me. I think if somebody wants to kill me, they'll kill me, and whether I have a gun or not. And you're living in a very different situation, and I'm guessing you're saying this a little bit tongue in cheek, but
kind of tongue in cheek. I mean, yes. You know what I mean? That the gun.
But we need to tamp down the rhetoric.
Yeah. You know what I mean? And even then, it's just I'm just saying that there's let's say that we have our own militias in the inner cities, and that they are the gangs. And, you know what I mean? They're just not going to sit there watching a bunch of white guys coming down the street with guns. It's just not going to happen, Tom.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get it. I get it. Horatio, thanks for the call. Alex in Tacoma, Washington. Hey, Alex, what's up?
Yeah, when I first turned on the radio this morning, you guys were talking about Ukraine maybe they were asking Ukraine to manufacture evidence or something about Biden. But yesterday, I'm kind of wondering, did you hear about the Inspector General had to go to these 7 or 8 committees, and he had documents that they needed to see right away. And apparently,
that testimony is happening right now, I believe.
No, that was yesterday. And apparently, these documents were what appeared to be legitimate, White House and Justice Department or documents, but they weren't. They were like forgeries. And there was. They don't know where they really even came from. But if they got to the Inspector General, they had to have come from somewhere high up. So it sounds like possibly evidence has already been.
No, they do know where this stuff came from, Alex. This stuff came out of the fever swamps of right-wing websites, and the question is how did it get? Right, how did it get in the hands of the president, and how did it get in the hands of the Secretary of State? And there seems to be a direct channel between the Alex Jones world and the Trump world, and the Fox world in between. And boy, is this dangerous stuff. Alex, thank you for the call, and thanks for pointing that out. I had missed that in my commentary. We'll be right back. So, Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. He needs to be impeached. Welcome back. It's Anything Goes Thursday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Robin in Belhaven, North Carolina. Hey, Robin, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. How are you? I am the first time I get through to you, but I didn't. Haven't always been able to hold long enough. Mm-hmm. My question is, it's actually a favor I would like you to do. I'd like you to discuss a little bit about what is the difference between a pre-70s or 80s Democrat and what they are now, which is neoliberals, and kind of give the people an idea of they're actually corporate friendly, which is why mainstream media loves them, Biden and Warren now, and the difference between them and Bernie Sanders and the DLC.
Yeah, well,
there's so many people that think the straight Dem ticket is the way to go, and I used to be one. I voted twice for Obama, and at a late age, I had to go to college, and I learned how to do some critical thinking, and I did my own research, and I'm like, oh my God, no wonder for the last 40 years we have lost all our power, because the DLC got
right, and Bill Clinton played a role in this. Robin, you open a large area for conversation. So let me just riff on this. And thank you very much for your call. And thanks for finally getting through and waiting online. This language basically comes out of Europe. In Europe, well, for example, the Liberal Party in Australia being, kind of having liberal sentiments, the Liberal Party in Australia is actually what we would call the libertarians. The classic liberalism, and this gets confusing, but classic liberalism was the idea that government should not be helping people out. That it's not the proper role of government to be making sure that people have enough food or enough clothing or enough health care or anything like that. Classic liberalism says that those are things that should be done by the marketplace, by the so-called invisible hand. And the main proponents of that today in this country are the objectivists, the followers of Ayn Rand, and the libertarians. The Libertarian Party was started in the 1940s by a lobbying group, a real estate industry lobbying group, in order to promote their interests, in order to be to put a patina of respectability and thoughtfulness on these ideas. So. And they even refer to themselves as liberals frequently, which just totally confuses people. You get these objectivists saying, we are the true liberals. Well, yeah, somebody from Great Britain would say yes, or somebody from Germany or Australia would say yes, but here in the United States, liberals, the word liberal has meant not that, not no government. It has meant big government, basically. It's meant that government actually does stuff like FDR did and like LBJ did. Those kinds of things. So somewhere along the 60s and 70s, really in the 70s, and I would say largely as a result of the Powell Memo and the institutions that it created, the Heritage Foundation, the Cato Institute, all these other groups, the Federalist Society and whatnot, liberalism got reinvented. And that is to say the classical libertarian version of liberalism. And it got reinvented as a new form of liberalism, neo being the Latin, or maybe it's Greek, I think it's Latin for new. And so the neoliberal idea was, okay, fine, we'll let government do more than just run the police, and we'll let government do more than just run the fire department. Government can play a small role in people's lives. There should be a small social safety net, but it should be a very, very limited role. And these people call themselves neoliberals, and this is, as you point out, the Democratic Leadership Council, which came up, Al Fromm and Bill Clinton basically created this thing in 1991, and Bill Clinton wrote it to victory in 92 and governed as a neoliberal. Declaring the era of big government is over, and we have ended welfare as we know it, slashing Lyndon Johnson's programs, ending some of Franklin Roosevelt's programs. And Barack Obama, by and large, continued that process. The Republicans are even more aggressive about that. They wouldn't even refer to themselves as neoliberals. The neoliberals tend to be an infestation inside the Democratic Party. And what's happening right now, I think, is that the Democratic Party is returning to its liberal roots which is why we use the word progressive now instead. Its progressive roots in Franklin Roosevelt and Lyndon Johnson. The Democratic Party took a huge turn away from progressivism, from all the extraordinary things that were done by these two presidents, took a huge turn away from them and towards neoliberalism. And it's moving back aggressively. And we're seeing that debate played out in the Democratic primaries. Right now, Joe Biden is the last big proponent, I think, of neoliberalism, although I would suggest that Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg are promoting, to a certain extent, neoliberal agendas. And I think Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren are the ones who are promoting a progressive agenda. But people don't know where these words came from, and so they get confused around this stuff. And I absolutely understand that. And, we can't just try to educate people every time the words come up, but that's what's so. It's Anything Goes Thursday. I'm live in Chicago at WCPT. I'll be doing a book signing tonight. You can get information at WCPT820.com if you're in the Chicago area. And we'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Our book for the book report today. Our book for the book report today is Taking Bullets, Terrorism and Black Life in 21st Century America, Confronting White Nationalism, Supremacy, Privilege, Plutocracy, and Oligarchy, a Poet's Representation and Challenge by Haki R. Madhuburi. He writes, this is from the chapter, page 27, the chapter Terror in the Midst of Prayer and Empire. In our perpetual state of national mourning, where our eyes are watered out and our hearts cease to heal at the rate the Creator meant them to, we hold hands in profound silence as we remember the Mother Emanuel 9 of Charleston, South Carolina, those 9 mothers, fathers, sisters, and brothers. Even before burying, before black earth covered their caskets, too many ministers, media pundits, and plain white and black folks downgraded the terror that quickened their deaths of our finest in this land to the mental illness and race hatred, in quotes, of a single young white man. He may have acted alone, but he was not alone in his thinking, encouragement, gathering of arms, warped consciousness, confirmation, or ahistorical views, and yeses from the millions in the nation who proudly wear and display the Confederate flag above their hearts and fly it in all of its traitorous glory over a state capitol and other institutions. Again, we find ourselves at war with history and culture, entertaining another call for a national conversation on race and a president weary of trying to make sense of and comfort the grief-stricken nation with words from the highest office of the land. This was written while Obama was president. These are the facts, not an opinion or the ignorant ranting of compromised preachers and television pundits. A 21-year-old white man, a citizen of South Carolina, walked into the sacred and spiritual home of the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church of Charleston, the historic home of black liberation fighter Denmark Vesey, and fatally killed 9 of its members, including the pastor, during Bible study. This was a pure act of domestic terrorism. A modern-day lynching by a young white nationalist who coolly and calmly assassinated 9 black members of Mother Emanuel. Domestic violence and acts of terrorism are on the rise in the United States, as detailed by Charles Kurzman and Daniel Schanzer in their New York Times op-ed, The Other Threat, where they state that, quote, the main terrorist threat in the United States is not from violent Muslim extremists, but from right-wing extremists, end quote. In their national research, local police agencies across the country identified, quote, the militias, neo-Nazis, and sovereign citizens as the major threat the nation faces in regard to extremism, end quote. All of this is homegrown with international connections. Morris Dees and J. Richard Cohen of the Southern Poverty Law Center also writes in the New York Times article, Racists Without Borders, that, quote, Americans tend to view attacks like the mass murder in Charleston as isolated hate crimes, the work of a deranged racist or a group of zealots lashing out in anger unconnected to a broader movement. This view we can no longer afford to indulge. When, according to survivors, Mr. Roof told the victims at the prayer meeting that black people were, quote, taking over the country, he was expressing sentiments that unite white nationalists from the United States and Canada to Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. Unlike those of the civil rights era, whose main goal was to maintain Jim Crow in the American South, today's white supremacists don't see borders. They see a white tribe under attack by people of color across the globe. The end of white rule in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, and South Africa, they believe, foreshadowed an apocalyptic future for all white people, a white genocide that must be stopped before it's too late. End of quote. The internationalization of terrorism is not a foreign theory in today's social media world. Dees and Cohen will be speaking at a conference in Budapest about this transnational white supremacism that is emerging as the world grows more connected technologically. The message of white genocide is spreading. Also, David J. Whitaker's Terrorism, Understanding the Global Threat, gives another view. Clearly, our rush to forgive this mass murderer within 96 hours of this supreme tragedy is misguided, anti-human, and does not allow for properly grieving the fallen. As perfectly scripted, displaying the permanent effectiveness of Christian acculturation on the Sunday, June 21st, 2015 morning services of Mother Emanuel Church, the black Christians out-Christianed their white brothers and sisters. Before the morning sermon, the presiding elder, Reverend Norvell Goff Sr., found it necessary to thank the local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies for doing their job. He also stated, quote, "A lot of folks expected us to do something strange and break out in a riot. Well, they just don't know us. We are people of faith," end quote. I find this statement inappropriate, insensitive, and ahistorical, implying, whether he meant it or not, that the recent uprising and rebellions in Ferguson, New York, Cleveland, and other parts of the nation were riots and did not include black people of faith, and that somehow they were strange in their social, political, and economic activism. Informed people do not riot against injustice or white terrorism. They study, organize, and strategically struggle at all levels, in the streets, on the campus, in front of the White House, and in corporate boardrooms. Dylan Roof stated his stated intentions were to start a race war, and informed black leadership understands that we cannot pray this away or appeal to any law enforcement agency that all across the country, including Charleston, has been seriously compromised. To label black reaction to murder, terrorism, deep unemployment, substandard housing, etc., as riot is to blame the victim. The book, Taking Bullets.
So every 5 years, the U.S. Department of Agriculture comes out with new guidelines, and we just put up a video over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program that talks about how the Trump administration, in this insanely corrupt deal with the $100 billion industry of ultra-processed, high-sugar, high-salt, high-fat foods that is literally killing 700,000 Americans a year, has said, oh, we're going to change the guidelines so that these fast food, high-processed food companies can shovel their stuff into our school lunch programs, into our kids. We're going to change the guidelines so people aren't informed about the importance of, dialing back somewhat on meat and on salt and sugar and all these other things. It's nuts. You can check the whole thing out over at thomhartmann.com. Look for the video for our, the supporters of our program at thomhartmann.com.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you live from Chicago. We're doing our show from the studios of Chicago's Progressive Talk, WCPT. And tonight I'll be doing a book signing at here in Chicago. Let me dig this back up again at Smart 265 in Carroll Stream on Alexander Way. The information's available at WCPT820.com. And then tomorrow we're going to be doing a labor panel with a live studio audience, and I'm pretty sure that's completely sold out, but the information would be over at WCPT. And then next week I'll be doing a book signing in Portland at Powell's. So that's our schedule. That's what's going on and what's coming up. Donald Trump committing another impeachable offense this morning as he's on his way down to Florida, stopping to tell the press that China, if you're listening, we'd like some dirt on the Bidens, which is a crime. It's a federal felony to say that. In fact, he put it in the context of trade deals. We're trying to work out a trade deal with China. So that's the thing of value that he was offering. This is bribery. And the Constitution says very clearly that the president shall be impeached upon conviction for treason, bribery, or high crimes and misdemeanors. And here we have it. It's right there. Meanwhile, Donald Trump, as I predicted this yesterday, is working as fast and as furiously as he can on behalf of the health insurance companies to destroy Medicare before it has an opportunity to become Medicare for all. And the way that they're doing this is, back in 2005, George W. Bush hates Medicare too. He tried to privatize Social Security and the entire Republican Party is ever since Medicare came along in the late 60s in the LBJ administration as part of the Great Society. The Republican Party has been on record saying this is socialism, it's a terrible thing. Big companies should have an opportunity to make a profit off your getting sick or your staying healthy for that matter. So what they did in 2005, I believe it was they created this Medicare Part C, which didn't exist before. It wasn't part of Medicare before. And Medicare Part C is not actually Medicare. It means you drop out of the Medicare system. You probably don't even realize you've done that. You drop out of the Medicare system and you sign up for insurance with a private for-profit health insurance company. Some of them are not for profit. Kaiser offers them too, but basically you're signing up for private health insurance. And the upside is that some of these private health insurance companies can offer things like vision and hearing aids and stuff like that. The downside is that they typically, because these are private health insurance companies and they've got to make their 20% skim off the top to pay their executives their $1 million salaries and to pay their stockholders their dividends, if you get sick, if you get seriously sick, you can end up $5, $10, $15, $20, or $1,000 or more in debt because of having gotten sick. And most people with Medicare Advantage plans don't realize this because they haven't yet gotten sick. But a lot of people have a very, very rude surprise when they do actually end up in the hospital because these plans, and you can look, you take the Medicare book, in the back pages of the Medicare book, it goes through all the Medicare Advantage plans and shows you how much your annual out-of-pocket is. Some are $3,000, some are $5,000, some are $10,000, some are $15,000, some are $20,000. And, the flip side of that, I have regular Medicare plus a Medigap plan, which fills in that 20% hole that was put in Medicare at the very beginning by Republicans saying, well, people have to have skin in the game or they'll abuse the system. My Medigap, policy costs me a couple $100 a month, and Medicare is $100 and change a month, and I have no deductibles, zero. I go to the doctor, I don't pay a penny. I go to the hospital, I don't pay a penny. The only thing that I pay for now is prescription drugs, and I get a huge discount on that because of Medicare Part D. But anyhow, so Trump goes down to Florida with his Medicare, what's her name? The Administrator for Medicare and Medicaid Services, Seema Verma, another great advocate of privatization. And what they're trying to do so far right now, about a third of people who think they're on Medicare are actually not on Medicare. They have these scam programs, these private insurance programs called Medicare Advantage. And that's, they've taken a third of people off Medicare and put them in these private programs just since 2005. That's just in 15 years. They're trying to get so many people off Medicare and onto Medicare Advantage, and particularly young, healthy people, because like I said, once people get sick, they figure out that it's a scam, and then they wait until November and they go back on Medicare. They dump their Medicare Advantage program. So the healthier, retirees are migrating to Medicare Advantage. And what Trump just did is he said, now these companies, these plans, even though they've got these high deductibles that people don't even know about until they get sick, that these plans can offer more things, gym memberships and eyeglasses and all kinds of cool stuff, maybe green drinks, who knows. But they've just expanded the range of things that Medicare Advantage plans can offer in order to entice more people to leave Medicare. And the whole idea here, and in fact, this policy that Trump signed today is called, God's honest truth, this is what it's called. It's called Protecting Medicare from Socialist Destruction. That's the name of the presidential directive or policy statement or whatever the official title is for what Ms. Verma and Mr. Trump are doing here. The whole plan is to get so many people off Medicare that Medicare itself gets crippled by being essentially the dumping ground for really sick people. And then they can say, see, Medicare doesn't work anymore. It can't sustain its own expenses. This is the exact same thing Betsy DeVos is doing with public schools. You go in and you take federal money or state money, you have government money, and you hand it off to religious schools, private schools, Christian schools, whatever it may be, and you cherry pick the best students. And then in poor neighborhoods where you have worse outcomes because poverty itself is, a horrible risk for bad school outcomes, in poor neighborhoods, the schools, because the money has been siphoned off for the charter schools, the public schools suffer, and then they say, see, look at this, public schools suck. We need to privatize the whole thing. This is when Democrats are advocating this, and there are a number of Democrats who advocate both these things. That is the neoliberalism that we were talking about in the last hour. When Republicans advocate it, they're not trying to just weaken these programs. as the neoliberal Democrats are, or the neoliberals in general. They're trying to destroy them. And Trump has just come right out and said, we're going to mess with Medicare and ruin it so badly. I mean, he hasn't said it in these words, but he said this is to prevent Medicare for all. I mean, in what universe would everybody want to become part of a system that is failing? And if they can cause Medicare to fail, and they're working on this very, very aggressively, if they can cause Medicare to fail, then it's going to be a heck of a lot harder to sell people on Medicare for all. Elizabeth Warren doesn't talk about this so much. She basically just points to Bernie's plan. But Bernie has been having to say over and over and over again, I mean, if you've been hearing him talk about this, that his Medicare for all plan isn't the current Medicare program. Because the current Medicare program has this 20% hole that you have to fill in with private health insurance, the old Republican skin in the game hole. Plus, Medicare has this exception, Medicare Part C, that allows for so-called Medicare Advantage plans, which are just purely private health insurance that's subsidized with money out of the Medicare program. So it weakens Medicare in a whole bunch of different ways, exactly like charter schools weaken public schools. You take money out of the program that's paying for the schools, you take money out of the program that's paying for Medicare. So Bernie keeps saying, I'm talking about something completely different. We're going to reinvent Medicare from the ground up, reestablish it as if it was 1967. We're going to restart it and just make it available to everybody and phase it in over a 4-year period. Well, Trump is betting that he can destroy Medicare or damage it so badly that people will look at Medicare and go, I don't want that. It's incredible. Anyhow, we'll pick up your phone calls right after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
There's a great summary of this, by the way, over at dailycoz.com, a piece by Joan McCarter. It's worth reading. And welcome back, Ron in Lake Comanche, California. Hey, Ron, what's on your mind today?
Oh, good morning, Tom. Congratulations about your new book about insights of the bankrupt philosophical Supreme Court. I'm a little bit tired, seriously. Yes, I'm looking forward to it. I think what's really causing us to wait here the longest is really Pence. Pence himself, and it's probably go back and retroactively sign PNAC. He's 90%. I'm 90% sure if he gets in there, I don't want to think about it. So anyway,
was Pence one of the signers of the Project for a New American Century in that letter to Bill Clinton saying bomb Iraq in '98? Was Pence one of the guys who signed that?
No, I think that he would actually love to go back in time if he could go in a time machine and retroactively sign it.
I see.
That's what he's been advocating for. I just didn't want to frighten people. So you understood. I'm just saying that I think that has been it. But this little excursion that they have together ties this in. I think this is a whole new ball game, and I think they're going to probably impeach him at the end of his presidency. I think that's probably the safest bet.
Impeach Trump at the end of his presidency.
Yeah.
See, I don't think so. I don't think that the Democrats are going to, they have already started this process. The cut or fish bait part is over. They have to move quickly and they have to get it done. If a Democrat is going to have a chance of beating Donald Trump or Mike Pence, if Trump is successfully impeached, they're going to have to get on that well before spring of next year, which means they've got to get this thing done before February.
I think this is a further indictment of the Republican Party on the theory of Pelosi. I think that she's going to actually show that these people are tied to the hip, and this is going to be bad for everybody except the Democratic Party election time. That's my theory.
Well, there's a Biden argument to be made here, by the way. If Trump gets thrown out and then Mike Pence becomes president, Mike Pence being, a smarmy kind of, how Mike Pence is. Pence is going to come forward and he's going to say, okay, our long national nightmare is over, which is what Jerry Ford said, and I'm going to clean things up and we're going to have some good government legislation, which is what Jerry Ford did. And then he's going to run for president as the reform candidate. That's going to take a lot of steam out of the progressive side of the Democratic Party because hey, Pence is already the progressive candidate, or not progressive, but, the reform candidate. And so it's going to cause, I think, a lot of Democrats to say the kind of middle of the road, low information voter Democrats, and a lot of the independents, actually, more independents than Democrats, to say, okay, well, let's consider Joe Biden. Let's slow and steady and stable and back to normal and all that kind of stuff. That all sounds good to me. I'm not ready for radical change. Radical change, yes, if it's against Donald Trump. But if Pence can present himself as a cloth coat Republican, as a Richard Nixon Republican, it's gonna upend the Democratic primary.
I don't believe that he can rebrand himself after the rhetoric of what he is and what he's about when he was a governor. I don't think that he just erased that. No.
But see, nobody knows. Nobody knows. I'll bet if you were to ask 100 Americans what was Mike Pence's job before he became president, they wouldn't be able to tell you. They couldn't tell you that he was a member of Congress and he was a governor from Indiana. And that he used to write op-eds talking about how tobacco doesn't cause cancer. Ron, thanks for the call. We'll be right back. So every 5 years, the U.S. Department of Agriculture comes out with new guidelines, and we just put up a video over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program that talks about. So every 5 years, the U.S. Department of Agriculture comes out with new guidelines, and we just put up a video over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program that talks about how the Trump administration, in this insanely corrupt deal with the $100 billion industry of ultra-processed, high-sugar, high-salt, high-fat foods that is literally killing 700,000 Americans a year, has said, oh, we're going to change the guidelines so that these fast food, high-processed food companies can shovel their stuff into our school lunch programs, into our kids. We're going to change the guidelines so people aren't informed about the importance of dialing back somewhat on meat and on salt and sugar and all these other things. It's nuts. You can check the whole thing out over at thomhartmann.com. Look for the video for our, the supporters of our program at Thom Hartmann. Welcome back. It's Anything Goes Thursday here on the Thom Hartmann Program, live from Chicago with many thanks to WCPT. Leah in Hopewell, Virginia. Hey, Leah, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I wanted to know, what do you think, or is it possible that debris, waste from space station and all of these corporate satellites is contributing also, along with the fossil fuel, the climate emergency? I want to know what you thought about that possibility, because NASA, it has a large budget, but is incapable of taking the U.S. astronauts to the space station. They rely on Russia. And the space station has astronauts from different countries. And also with the 45th, forming a, quote, space army, I'm afraid it's going to be like a Christopher Columbus attitude. Just wanted to know, is it possible that all this debris and stuff that's in the atmosphere could be causing, some of our climate
change or other problems?
Too. Yeah, climate change.
Good question, Leah.
For your answer, please.
Okay, thanks a lot. First of all, with regard to climate change, the major contributor that the space program makes to climate change is rocket fuel, particularly the solid propellants. They not only emit massive amounts of carbon dioxide, but they also emit secondary chemicals, also in the manufacturing process of these, secondary chemicals that persist in the atmosphere a lot longer than carbon dioxide, that are also heat-trapping chemicals. So it's actually the rockets going up that is the major, in terms of the space program, the major contributor to climate change. In terms of the space debris, it is a big problem. It's a problem for the space station folks. It's the low Earth orbit area of the edge of our atmosphere, the outer space edge of our atmosphere, the place where they kind of meet, has become filled with debris and junk, and it's dangerous. I don't think that there's much danger, generally speaking, from that debris, because when it does fall into our atmosphere and fall to Earth, it gets burned up, and it gets burned up so at such high temperatures. It's like putting, toxic waste, for example, they put them in these super high temperature incinerators where the temperature is so high that it breaks the compounds down to their elemental, down to the original elements. I mean, not even to molecules, but all the way to atoms. And so I doubt that there's a problem there. However, there are some satellites that are nuclear powered. Some of the older satellites, the new ones are pretty much all solar powered, but there are some satellites up there that have small nuclear reactors in them, and we have launched some deep space probes that had nuclear reactors in them to power them, and some of them have not been successful launches, haven't made it all the way up. If one of those things disintegrates into the atmosphere, it'll still break down to its original elements, but the elements will be things like uranium and plutonium and cesium and strontium that are all radioactive, the radioactive isotopes of those, and those will get into our atmosphere. That's not a good thing. It's nothing, though, like Fukushima, which is just pouring this stuff into the Pacific Ocean literally every day. This would be so diluted that it probably wouldn't be noticeable. So I'm not, frankly, all that concerned about that. Thanks for the call. Great question. Tim in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Hey, Tim, what's up?
Yeah, Mr. Hartman, it's a pleasure to talk to you. You run a great show. Now, what I was calling about was you answered my question just a few minutes ago. I was calling about this Donald Trump craziness about saving Medicare from socialist destruction, and I have a great fear of what that might actually mean, because I don't put anything past this maniac. And I tell you, I am on Medicare, and I have a heart condition, and if I didn't have Medicare, I'd be living under a bridge. So I just want to, give a heads up to all the folks out there that Trump is up to no damn good, excuse my language, is up to no good on this saving Medicare from socialist destruction. And you laid out the answer just perfectly for what I was seeking, and I appreciate it. And I'll get off the air now and let you take another call.
Okay, thank you, Tim, and thanks for the acknowledgement. I appreciate your kind words, and you're absolutely right. Rob in Guys Mills, Pennsylvania. Hey, Rob, what's up?
Yeah, I agree with you and a bunch of your callers. Hear me out to get to the point on this. I want the public to understand these problems stem from monopoly and antitrust law violations broken by corporations, especially media. Remember, as soon as Bush was on there about too big to fail, the country should have been very suspicious. Instead, they handed out $300 to $600 appeasement checks to brainwash the public that everything was okay. And then they basically handed off a Great Depression to Obama that miraculously managed to save us from it. The country was recovering. We were moving forward slow. All the results that Trump thinks he's accomplished are really tied to Obama. And we should have stayed the course. We should have begun to strengthen our infrastructure and bringing our quality jobs back. And I think we'd be really...
Yeah, I can't disagree with anything you're saying, Rob. You're singing my song. In fact, I'm writing a book right now, The Hidden History of Monopoly and the Destruction of Capitalism and Democracy. I hope to have it finished by the end of this month, in fact. And spot on. It's a real problem. It is a very, very real problem. We'll be back with more of your calls on Anything Goes Thursday here on the Thom Hartmann
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We will be right back with more of your calls here on the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where despair is not an option. Our book today is Cyber War, How Russian Hackers and Trolls Helped Elect a President by Kathleen Hall Jamieson. This is from the introduction.
Imagine a strategy memo forecasting cyber attacks by Russian hackers, trolls, and bots designed to roil social discontent and damage the electoral process of a major party U.S. presidential nominee. Or, if she winds up winning, sabotage her ability to govern. Guaranteed payoff, no fingerprints, no keystroke record, no contrails in the cloud. To ensure that Americans would believe that disparaging messages about her were made in the U.S., use Bitcoin to buy space and set up virtual private networks on American servers. Distribute hacked content stolen from the accounts of her staff and associates through an intermediary, WikiLeaks. Use identity theft, stolen social security numbers, and appropriated IDs to circumvent Facebook and PayPal's demand for actual names, birth dates, and addresses. On platforms such as Instagram and Twitter, register under assumed names. Diffuse and amplify your attack and advocacy through posts on Facebook, tweets and retweets on Twitter, videos on YouTube, reporting and commentary on RT, blogging on Tumblr, news sharing on Reddit, and viral memes and jokes on 9gag. Add to the mix a video game called Hilltendo, in which a missile-trading Clinton figure vaporizes classified emails sought by the FBI. Employ online agitators and bots to upvote posts from imposter websites such as blackmattersus.com to the top of such subreddits as r/thedonald and r/Hillary for prison. Drive content to trend. To maximize the impact of your handiwork, use data analytics and search engine maximization tools built into social media platforms. To test and fuel doubts about the security of U.S. voter information, hack the electoral systems of the states. And throughout the primary and general elections season, seed the notion that if Hillary Clinton were to win, she would have done so by rigging the election, an outcome that would repay her assaults on the legitimacy of their leader's presidency with doubts about her own. Were she instead to lose, she would no longer be a thistle in the toned torso of the hackers and trolls' boss's likely boss. Every result but one produces a desirable outcome for the Kremlin. Outcome 1, Clinton is off the international stage. Outcome 2, she wins but can't govern effectively. Outcome 3, the former Secretary of State is elected and the country simply moves on, but the sabotage nonetheless has magnified cultural tensions and functions as a pilot from which to birth later success, perhaps when she runs for a second term. The only eventuality that damages the Russian cyber soldiers and their commander-in-chief is the fourth, in which, in real time, the cyber attackers are unmasked by a vigilant intelligence community, condemned by those in both major political parties and around the world, characterized by the media as spies and saboteurs. The Russian message is blocked or labeled as Russian propaganda, and when included in media accounts, the stolen content is relentlessly tied to its Russian origins and sources. None of that, however, happened. Instead, to the surprise of the Russian masterminds, as well as both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, he won the Electoral College, and with it a 4-year claim on 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Although countrywide she bested him by almost 2.9 million votes, he unexpectedly captured an Electoral College majority by running the table. By the end of the evening of November 8th, Florida, as well as Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, were in his column. The ways in which Russian hacking and social media messaging altered the content of the electoral dialogue and thus contributed to Donald Trump's victory are the subjects of this book. To begin my exploration, this overview chapter will highlight key findings of the U.S. intelligence community, preview my focus on the hackers and trolls and the synergy between them, justify casting the Russian machinations as acts of cyber war, outline ways in which susceptibilities in our system of government and media structures magnified their effect, and note 5 presuppositions that will shape my analysis of the Russian trolls' work, and one that will guide my study of the effects of the hackers. Forming the backdrop for my inquiry are 3 reports on the Russian intervention of the 2016 presidential election. The October 7, 2016 statement jointly issued by the Department of Homeland Security and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence on Election Security. The January 2017 conclusion of the U.S. intelligence agencies, CIA, FBI, NSA, and the February 2018 Robert Mueller indictment of 13 of the Russians allegedly behind the social media intrusions. On a day that will live in campaign lore, as much for what didn't happen as what did, more on that in a moment, the first of the 3 revealed the following. The U.S. intelligence community is confident that the Russian government directed the recent compromises of email from U.S. persons and institutions, including the U.S. political organizations. The recent disclosures of alleged hacked emails on sites like DCLeaks.com and WikiLeaks and by the Guccifer 2.0 online persona are consistent with the methods and motives of Russian-directed efforts. These thefts and disclosures were intended to interfere with the U.S. election process. Such activity is not new to Moscow. The Russians have used similar tactics and techniques across Europe and Eurasia, for example, to affect public opinion there. We believe, based on the scope and sensitivity of these efforts, that only Russia's senior-most officials could have authorized these activities. That's from the report. The next report put a name to one of those senior-most officials and specified an intended beneficiary, Donald Trump. Cyber war is the...
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you live from Chicago, from WCPT's studios. It's Anything Goes Thursday. Tomorrow we're going to be doing a fascinating labor panel and conversations with some really great people on a whole variety of topics, including impeachment and politics and everything else, and also labor stuff. So, tune in. But today I'm taking your calls. Rob in Mesa, Arizona. Hey, Rob, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Hey, I've got a comment suggestion, then a question. The first comment suggestion is, that response that you gave for the Monsanto caller, I would love to have that in an individual clip, if you could include that in your weekly, because I would love to forward that response. That summed it up perfectly. I know you guys do a lot of work.
Nate is listening. Nate is our video director, and he's the guy, our video producer. He's the guy who puts those things together every afternoon, and I'm sure he.
If you're throwing your promotional stuff on that, we would love to forward it. My wife and I are precinct committee people, and that's something we'd like to get out there.
It'll probably be up on YouTube in the next 4 or 5 hours.
Great, thank you. Hey, my question is that Stephen Linick, from the State Department Inspector General, that gave his briefing to the lawmakers, and then he handed over that weird, bizarre envelope that was, the calligraphy of from Pompeo to Ruth, and it had the return address.
Right. It was full of what were apparently phony baloney documents. Forged
right. Wouldn't that be lying to Congress?
Documents.
Yes, wouldn't that be considered lying to Congress? Does this fabricate material and hand it over?
Well, no, what he was, my understanding, and again, this was closed testimony, so we don't know exactly what happened. What we're dealing with here is leaked information. But my understanding is that these forged documents that look like they're internal U.S. government documents that would give credence to the idea that there is a deep state conspiracy against Donald Trump. Although we don't, again, know the details because we haven't seen the documents. But that's what I'm hearing, that those documents had been floating around inside the Trump administration. Somebody has been providing those documents, these forged documents. And apparently Donald Trump and Bill Barr and Mike Pompeo and these guys and Mike Pence thought that they were real documents and thought that there was a real problem. And we really need to investigate this stuff and quack, quack, quack. And the reason the Inspector General brought them to Congress was to say, these guys are nuts, and this is the stuff that's making them nuts, and y'all need to figure out where this came from and do something about it.
Okay.
That's my understanding.
Yeah, I was under the impression. I was under the impression he was trying to push that as a reason. So, okay, that makes more sense.
Oh no! The whole. Apparently, the whole reason that he brought that to Congress was to say, there's something. Something's rotten in Denmark here.
Well, great. All right, thank you. Thanks for the information.
Sure. Thanks a lot for the call, Rob. Jeff in Portland. Hey, Jeff, what's up?
Hey, good day, Tom. Great show from the road. Thanks for taking my call. Since you're there in the Midwest and getting ready to do tomorrow's show with a group of labor leaders, I thought you might be interested to check out an article just posted on the Detroit Free Press homepage by Jamie LaRoe. It gives a good rundown on what's at play in the UAW strike against GM. And Tom, even though GM
Thanks for the heads up.
even though GM made $12 billion in profits in North America alone last year, even though they pay their CEO over $20 million a year, that still isn't enough for them. Besides cutting health care, which of course Medicare for all would solve, GM also wants to increase its reliance on temp workers who get less pay and little or no benefits. So, Tom, the UAW, these striking GM workers are making a stand for the middle class. And as you know, Charlie Wilson once famously said, as GM goes, so goes America. Today, shouldn't we be saying, as GM's unionized workforce goes, so goes America?
Yeah, wasn't the phrase "What's good for GM is good for America"? Yeah, but you could also paraphrase
maybe
that as what's good for GM's workers is good for America. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, GM's trying to go with the temp workers, the gig economy, and leave the middle class behind as they make record profits and pay their executives millions of dollars a year. And these guys are taking a stand, and I think they deserve our support. And I hope your guest tomorrow will delve into that even more.
Great. Thanks for that, Jeff. And I'll go looking for that article when I get off the air. I appreciate the call. Jackie in Grass Valley, California. Hey, Jackie, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Hey, you were talking about Trump a little bit ago, and I just think he's an abomination. I think yesterday he was saying he was a stable genius. I think he's just the opposite. I think he's just a moron, and I'm so appalled at what he's doing on the border. I want to say that I think it's a fraud. It's a scam against the taxpayers, and it's going to put our national deficit in the red like you'll never believe, and we're going to need it. I just want to.
He's already added $2 trillion to our national deficit, to our national debt, rather. I mean, at least $2 trillion.
I'm sorry.
He added $1.5 trillion just with. He's already added $1.5 trillion to our national debt, and he borrowed that money in the bond market and gave it to his rich buddies and himself. I mean, he made millions in that tax cut. So
all he's doing is scamming us.
Yeah. This is what he's done all his life. Jackie, thank you. Well said. Not sure what we do with that. I mean, those are strong arguments as to vote the bums out, and not just Trump, but all the Republicans who are Trump's sycophants, to vote them all out. But I'm also looking at the actual crimes that Trump seems to be committing, and I think that those are good reasons for us to be talking about impeaching him. Joe in Cupertino, California. Hey, Joe, what's up?
Good afternoon, Tom. It's wonderful, the topics today. I was really sorry to hear that a lot of our fellow Americans don't get their representatives to hold town halls. I'm going to be seeing Roe this evening as we celebrate the 150th birthday of Gandhi. But I was interested. You're going to be in Chicago talking to big labor, and some of the internet things that I'm reading is that there needs to be a separation of what's the Bernie Sanders' standpoint of health care for all versus the other candidates. And, having read Bernie's plan, I'm really educated on what he's talking about. But I wonder if big labor is just thinking about what benefits them. I mean, I was a union member, and I know we negotiated wages and benefits at the table. We sacrificed a lot of wages to get the benefits that we enjoy, and I think Medicare for All, as Bernie's describing it, is essentially the benefits that most union members enjoy. I wanted to see if the union thinks that the benefit of Medicare for All and the savings to the employer, what kind of a dollar bargaining chip? Is there a percentage? I mean, I can't do it in my head. I know that I paid, I'd say 10, 15% of what I earned as an employee as far as wages and benefits go. I had a copay, but my employer paid a percentage. And in the GM case where, they have really good benefits, but today's economy is a gig economy. And where I live, nobody has any benefits. So it's kind of a trade-off. I'm trying to suggest to bring that up to the union so that when they go back to the membership and they have to decide that maybe Biden isn't the union man that they think he is, that maybe we could say that we could get everybody covered and no more of this worried about who's going to, pay for everything, and just make sure that we all have health care, and then everybody can get a pay raise. A pay raise is a significant amount because you won't be paying for Medicare anymore. You won't be paying it as Medicare as you know it. You'll be paying from cradle to grave for a benefit that everyone enjoys.
Joe, I'll bring that up tomorrow. I think it's you make a good point. I know that there are some unions that have come out explicitly in favor of Medicare for All, and there are other unions who have said, wait a minute, we use this as a negotiating tool. And so, we'll see where this goes. By the way, I wrote an op-ed about authoritarianism, the rise of authoritarianism around the world, and frankly, I think that this is exactly what we're seeing right now. I'm sorry, I don't have the title for it right in front of me, but it is up on Common Dreams, and we've just posted it to Facebook and Twitter. So check that out. I put a lot of work into this thing over the weekend, and it's a pretty scary situation, frankly, that we are in my humble opinion. Lynn in El Segundo, California. Hey, Lynn, what's on your mind today?
Hi, I have some exciting news for the previous callers from Washington State who said they can't get into town halls for their current Democratic reps. Okay, so Danny Heck in Washington 10 has a challenger who's a 25-year-old anti-corruption truck driver. He's fantastic. His name is Joshua Lee Collins, and his website is just joshua2020.com. And in Washington 6 with Derek Kilmer, there's Rebecca Parson, and her website is Rebecca for Washington.com. And also, while you're in Illinois, you have an opportunity, if you could, reach out to Maureen Newman in Illinois 3. She's running against Dan Lipinski, and her website is MaureenNewmanForCongress.com. Now, the reason I'm saying all this is because they are brave, courageous challengers to current incumbents that are supported by the Democratic leadership. Sherry Bustos' policy is, I'm going to blackball anybody who supports these brave souls who want to be progressive and take the seat back. And they're not only the candidates, but their pollsters, their consultants. They all face being blacklisted and losing their jobs. It's a really strong case for people power. Bring back the party to the progressive side by supporting these candidates. And I just have three more. Oh, shoot. Rachel Ventura in Illinois 11. She's running against Bill Foster. And Bobby Rush, the candidate in Illinois 1, has got a great challenger, RobertEmmons.org, RobertEmmons.org. Please support these really great challenges.
Will do, Lynn. Thank you very much for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And we need to add Kurt Schrader to that list. We'll be right back with more live from Chicago. Stick around. Okay, and welcome back. Diana in Vancouver, Washington. Hey, Diana, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, it's been a while. You and I encountered each other during Occupy, and we both wrote the same thing about, you may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, and you always say great minds think alike. I called you a while back when they were working on the ACA, and to make the point that that Medicare had farmed out private contracts to private insurance companies. Therefore, private insurance companies were essentially going by Medicare rules, but there was already the tie-in there. That was what I was telling you back then, because I believe I told you there were lousy like the only thing secure about that horizon was that you'd be getting out your wallet. And so at the time I was getting very frustrated by the lack of knowledge just in Congress, the things they were saying about health care.
So where are you going with this, Diana?
I'm sorry, but I put together a big picture when you were talking about how the money comes out of Medicare, so it's not really Medicare in that sense. So I have another point regarding, I had wondered about the 20% on Bernie's plan. Well, you filled that gap in. So the whole picture now needs to be completed by the fact that we have a shortage of physicians across the country.
Right. That's been the case for a long, long time, because the AMA has been keeping the number of med school graduates low in order to keep physicians' salaries high.
Yes. And there's a whole story behind that of how private practice went away, and a lot of it has to do with what happened with the Medicare contract when they gave it to private insurance companies. However, my point is we have a shortage of physicians, and every time I hear "keep your doctor," I want to say, from the shortage, pick your doctor from the shortage. In most communities, if you have Obamacare, what they call, HCA, you're going to be, or Medicaid expansion, you're going to be sitting right next to a Medicare person who has, regular Medicare or Medicare Advantage. The same doctors are seeing all of these patients. There are no wonderful, magic, special doctors that private insurance is paying you to, is paying to come see you when you pay more for that.
I get your point, and I think the good news is is that there are people within medicine that are filling in these gaps. One of my kids is a nurse practitioner. Another one of my kids just took her final exam yesterday, the day before yesterday, for becoming a physician's assistant, a PA. And these are, they're filling in a lot of the holes that are left by doctors. And frankly, my experience has been that nurse practitioners and PAs NPs and PAs provide better care. I mean, they don't have to operate on this. You've got 6 minutes in the billing cycle for the doctor. They'll sit and talk with you for 15, 20, 30 minutes and do a little deeper dive, and they're more likely to catch things that doctors would miss. So, in a way, the AMA has kind of shot themselves in the foot. It's important stuff. Diana, thank you very much for the call. It's nice to hear from you. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the end.
Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. The radical back. We're doing our show live from Chicago, from WCPT. And speaking of which, Laura, listening to WCPT in Chicago, you're on the air.
Hi, Tom. How are you? A very interesting show. I love the calls. And welcome to Chicago.
Thanks.
So I wanted to talk about, people have broached the subject of space and all of this space junk that we have and the satellites. Mm-hmm. And I'm a 5G activist now. I am absolutely opposed to 5G because the amount of electromagnetic radiation in our entire environment is going to increase astronomically. With what they predict by 2030 will be 500 billion wireless devices in our environment, 60 wireless devices per every person alive. So you gotta be looking at some of this data, right? That the medical and health professionals and researchers are putting out. And one place that I would really recommend people to go is the 5GSpaceAppeal.org. 5G Space Appeal, where there's over 150,000 signatures to this now, and it is appealing to the World Health Organization and the UN for a moratorium on 5G. So right now, in our atmosphere around the world, there's just under 5,000 satellites that are circulating. But with 5G, they want to put up another 20,000 satellites, and they want to beam microwave radiation into our atmosphere. there's lots of people. In fact, NOAA is in a huge fight with the FCC over these satellites because they say it's going to impact their ability to monitor weather conditions and water vapor. So the scientists are really calling the alarm on 5G, and I really, really would like people to, look up some of this information. Other places to go for really good information is. I'm so sorry.
Go ahead, real quick.
Yeah, there's a site, ehtrust.org, and it's short for Environmental Health Trust.org. So ehtrust.org, there's a bunch of doctors and health professionals that are putting up really good information there. And then there's an excellent video on YouTube with the former president of Microsoft Canada, Frank Clegg, talking about the safety and the non-safety of 5G and wireless technologies. So this guy really knows what he's talking about, right? He's the former president of Microsoft.
Okay, Laura, you made your point. You made it very well, and for people who want to learn more about it, they can check that stuff out. Carrie in New Windsor, New York. Hey, Carrie, what's on your mind?
Hey, how's it going?
Good. There's a little delay between us, so small talk is not all that useful. What's up?
Sorry. So now that Bernie has shown some weakness, we really need to think like these Trump people who voted for Trump. And I have a solution on how to get a woman president, and I have a solution on how we can get away from face FU fill in the blank. So I like to call it that. Because, Mark Zuckerberg just totally, there was this stuff leaked about how he's totally going to take on Elizabeth Warren, and he's totally on it regarding the antitrust stuff. He knows about it.
Yeah. And by the way, if I can insert something here about Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook just, if you go to popular.info, Judd Legum wrote about this today. Facebook yesterday changed their rules. They will no longer, they used to say if you had a deceptive political ad, they would not allow you to run it. And the Trump administration came to them and said, we've got $1.5 million. We want to buy these ads. And the ads are filled with lies. CNN just said, no, we're not going to run your ad. But Facebook has changed their rules, so they will now allow lies in political ads. And so the Trump campaign is all over Facebook now. But you're right. Mark Zuckerberg said that, if Elizabeth Warren becomes president, he's a little freaked out because she's talked about breaking up big corporations. Where were you going with that?
Yeah, there's two ways. The way to get away from face FU blank blank is for more of those tech people who never taught us, we were wanting to ask them, how do we run our own websites? And they were so social anxiety that they were learn it yourself. And then everybody went to this user-friendly face FU blank blank. And for a woman to be president, that's what we've got now. And so your woman, the lady yesterday on there, I was going to ask her, I have two solutions on a woman president. One is, talking about sexism as much as we talk about racism, and inserting the thing about sexism into every single, just have it bleed into everything. And I think that's the only way that we've got a brown skin president. And that's, and so just inserting that into everything. To the point where we're talking about reparations for women in the form of back pay. But
yeah, it's a big issue, Carrie. Thank you very much for the call. And I would love to see a woman as president of the United States. It's high time. I would absolutely love to see it. Thanks so much for being with us. Tomorrow I'll be. We're going to have this fascinating panel. You're going to hear from some truly great minds. And we'll be talking about all these things, all these political things, as well as a whole lot of labor issues live from Chicago. If you're in the Chicago area, come out tonight and I'll sign your book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. And check out my new op-ed. It's just up over at commondreams.org. And don't forget, democracy depends on you. So get out there, get active, tag. You're it. I'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
We say fight back!
Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.
Bye.